The trunk hit the mud before Amelia Hart did. "Take it and go," Josiah Bell said, and slammed the boarding house door in her face while half of Red Valley watched from the boardwalk. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A woman knelt in the street in a wedding dress she'd sewn herself on a train 2,000 miles long, and 40 people decided at the exact same moment that she was somebody else's problem. Before we go on, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because in about an hour, that woman is going to make this whole town choke on their own words. The trunk hit the mud before Amelia Hart did. She heard it land that flat, wet final sound a half second before her knees followed it down. Her hands went out. The cold came up through her gloves like it had been waiting for her all her life. Behind her, the door of Bell's boarding house shut so hard, the window glass rattled in its frame. She did not cry. That was the first thing the town noticed, and the thing that made them the most uncomfortable. A woman crying they'd have known what to do with. A woman kneeling silent in the street with her chin still up that they had no use for. "Mr. Bell," she said. Not loud. She said it to the door. "Mr. Bell, open this door." Nothing. "Josiah Bell." Louder now. "You wrote me 11 letters." The boardwalk went so quiet she could hear a horse shifting its weight 40 feet away. "You wrote me 11 letters," she said again, and stood up, and the mud came with her hanging off the front of that dress in ropes. "You told me you had 40 acres, and a good roof and a lonesome heart. You told me you'd meet the coach with flowers. I have every letter in that trunk, Mr. Bell, in your own hand, and I will read them out loud on this street until you open that door." The door opened. Josiah Bell was 32 years old, handsome in the way that a fence post is straight. Nothing behind it but wood. He filled the doorway, and he did not step down into the mud, because that would have cost him something. "Miss Hart," he said, gentle as a preacher, loud enough for the boardwalk. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene. You're distressed. Anyone can see it." He turned his head just slightly toward the men outside the mercantile, just enough. "And I'll say this in front of these good people because I won't be accused of hiding it. I did write to a woman back east. I did make an offer. And when that woman stepped off the coach yesterday, I saw plain what she was, and I withdrew it. Any man here would have done the same." Amelia went very still. "What I was," she repeated. "I won't say more. I'm not cruel." "You'll say more." Her voice cracked across the street like a whip. "You'll say every word of it right now out loud where you can be answered." "Ma'am?" "Say it." And Josiah Bell looked at her with something like pity, and that was the moment she understood she was already dead in this town, and he said, "There's a child, isn't there?" The street made a sound, not a word. A sound. 40 people inhaling at once. Amelia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Because there was a child, her sister's 4 years old, buried in a Baltimore churchyard next to the mother who bore her, and Amelia had written about that little girl in her 3rd letter. 6 pages of it, the only time in her whole life she had ever put that grief on paper for another human being to hold. He had read it. He had kept it. And he had just turned it inside out and hung it on her like a sign. "You," she said. "I'm sorry," Josiah said, and he sounded sorry. That was the terrible thing. He sounded so genuinely sorry that 2 women on the boardwalk nodded. "I'm sorry that you thought you could start over out here without saying what you left behind. Folks out here are simple people. We deal honest." "Her name was Ruth," Amelia said. "Ma'am, her name was Ruth. She was my sister's girl, and she died of scarlet fever in my arms in April of 1881. And I wrote you that because you said—" Her voice broke one single time, and she hated herself for it. "Because you said you'd lost people too, and I thought I had found one honest man in this world." Josiah Bell said very kindly, "You see how she is." And he shut the door. That was noon. By 2 o'clock the story had grown a second head. By 4 it had 4. A dead niece became a living daughter. A living daughter became a daughter she'd left somewhere. By supper in the back room of the Mercantile, a man named Dutch Corliss, who had never laid eyes on Amelia Hart, was telling 3 other men that she'd come out here running from a husband and that Josiah Bell, poor Josiah, had dodged a bullet the size of a wagon wheel. Amelia Hart spent that afternoon walking. She walked to the boarding house first because it was the only address she had. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Lyle, a widow, a woman who had herself once arrived in this valley with nothing but a name, looked at the money in Amelia's hand and looked at her face and said, "We're full. I can see the board. There are 4 keys hanging. We're full. Mrs. Lyle." Amelia set the coins down on the counter one at a time so they made a sound. "You know that's not so." "I know I have to live here after you're gone," Mrs. Lyle said. And that was the most honest thing anybody said to her all day. She walked to the church. The Reverend Mercer was not in. His wife Cora was in, and Cora Mercer stood in the doorway of the parsonage with her hand on the frame and her body filling the gap, so no part of Amelia could get past her, and said, "There's a train Thursday." "I have no money for a train." "There's a train Thursday," Cora Mercer said again in exactly the same voice, and the words meant, "I heard you and I do not care," and Amelia understood that she had just been refused by a church. She walked to the laundry. The Chinese man there. Mr. Fong looked at her a long moment, and she saw in his face that he knew precisely what was happening to her, that he had lived some version of it himself, and she saw him almost speak. Then his eyes moved past her shoulder to the 2 men standing across the street watching, and he said quietly, "I am sorry, miss," and shut his door, and she did not blame him 1 inch. She walked to the freight office. Full up. She walked to the schoolhouse and asked the man locking it whether they needed a teacher, and told him she had 4 years at a girls' academy and could teach Latin, and he laughed. Not cruelly. That was somehow worse. He laughed the way you laugh at a child saying something sweet and said, "Ma'am, you couldn't get hired in this valley to shovel out a barn by tomorrow morning. You don't know what's happened to you yet, do you?" "Tell me." "You've been decided," he said. "That's all. It's done." It took about 2 hours. She left Red Valley at 5:30 with her trunk on her back, not dragging it. On her back with a rope, she'd cut off a hitching post and knotted through the handles, and she walked out of that town on the East Road with 40 people watching her go, and not one of them offering a wagon. And that image, that thin woman bent double under a trunk, walking out into open country with the cold coming down, that image sat in the back of a lot of people's minds in Red Valley for a very long time. Some of them would tell you later, they almost said something. Almost. Elias Carter did not know any of it. He was 11 miles out on a ridge counting cattle for the 3rd time, and getting a different number for the 3rd time, which meant somewhere in that gray afternoon there were 9 head of his, standing in a draw waiting to die when the weather turned. He'd been in the saddle since 4 in the morning. He had eaten nothing but a heel of bread. He was 38 years old, and he had spoken 41 words that day, all of them to horses. His wife had been dead 9 years. He did not think about that. He had gotten very, very good at not thinking about that. It was a skill he had built, the way a man builds a wall 1 stone at a time over 9 winters. And the wall was so complete now that whole weeks went by where he did not remember there was anything behind it. Her name had been Sarah. She'd been 24. She and the baby had gone the same night, and Elias had ridden 19 miles for a doctor in the dark and come back with him at dawn. And the doctor had taken off his hat in the doorway, and that was the last time Elias Carter had asked anyone for help with anything. He turned for home at dusk with 9 head unaccounted for and a sky the color of a bruise, and about a mile from his gate his horse stopped and would not go on. "Go on," Elias said. The horse did not go on. Elias sat there. Then he said a word he'd have apologized for in front of a woman and got down and walked forward and found the wagon. It was an old freight wagon with a broken axle abandoned by somebody 3 or 4 seasons back, half sunk. He'd ridden past it 200 times. Nothing about it should have been different. Then the trunk in front of it moved. Elias stopped. It was not a trunk. There was a trunk, and there was a person folded over it with her arms around it, and the person's hair had come down, and she was not moving anymore, except for a shudder every few seconds that ran the whole length of her, which was the body doing the last thing it knows how to do. He was on his knees in the frozen grass before he knew he'd moved. "Ma'am?" "Nothing, ma'am." He got a hand under her jaw. She was so cold, it went through his glove. "Look at me, look at me. Open your eyes." Her eyes opened. They did not track. Then they did all at once, and she came up off that trunk swinging. Her fist caught him square in the mouth. "Don't touch me. Lady, don't you touch me." She was scrabbling backward hands and heels, and she got maybe 4 feet, and her arms gave out, and she went down, and she still had her chin up, still had her eyes on him. And Elias Carter, who had not been surprised by anything in 9 years, sat back on his heels, with blood on his lip and something moving in his chest that he did not recognize and did not want. "All right," he said, "I'll fight you." "I see that." "I have nothing left," she said, and her teeth were going so hard the words came apart in the middle, "and I will still fight you, and I will make it cost you. Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you." He held both hands up, palms out, and stayed exactly where he was. "My name's Elias Carter. That's my gate 1/2 mile that way. You're on my land. It's going to be 4 degrees tonight, and you have about 20 minutes. She stared at him. 20 minutes, he said again. "I don't know you." "No, ma'am. Men in this valley are liars." Elias Carter thought about that. It took him a second, and then he said the only true thing he had. "Most everywhere I expect. But you're going to die out here in 20 minutes, and I'd rather you didn't do it on my property, because I'd have to be the one to bury you, and the ground's froze." And Amelia Hart, dying filthy, ruined 4 hours out of the worst day of her life, made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's your argument," she said. "The ground's froze." "Yes, ma'am." "You're a terrible speaker." "I've been told." She looked at him a long, long moment. Later, years later, she would say that she made her decision right there, and not for any noble reason, and not because she trusted him, but because he hadn't offered her one single kind word. Every man who'd wrecked her life had opened with a kind word. "If you lay a hand on me," Amelia Hart said, "I will put a knife in you while you sleep." Fair enough. "I mean it." "Ma'am," Elias said, standing up, "I believe you more than anything anybody's said to me all year. Can you stand?" She could not stand. He carried her and she let him, and she hated it, and she never forgot that he put her on the horse and walked the whole 1/2 mile himself, in the dark leading it, without saying one word. She came up out of it around midnight in a room she didn't know with her boots off, and 3 blankets on her, and a fire going, and she was out of that bed with her hand around the water pitcher as a weapon, before her feet had even hit the floor. "Coffee's on the stove," Elias said from a chair across the room. He had not been sleeping. He was sitting in his coat with his hat on his knee, like a man in a waiting room. "Your things are in the corner, all of them. I didn't open the trunk. There's a bar on that door. I put it there. It's on the inside." Amelia looked at the door. There was a bar on it, new wood, cut that night. She stood there holding a pitcher over her head for about 6 more seconds, and then she set it down, and her legs went, and she sat down hard on the edge of the bed, and put her face in her hands, and did not cry, and did not cry, and did not cry. "I don't need anything," she said into her palms. "No, ma'am." "I'm not staying." "No, ma'am." "I'll be gone in the morning." "It's 4 degrees," Elias said. "So no, ma'am, you won't. But you can tell yourself you will if it helps." She lifted her head and looked at him, then really looked for the first time. A big, wind-cut, weather-ruined man of 38 who looked 50 sitting in a chair in his own house wearing his coat because he'd given her the only blankets waiting up all night in case she woke afraid. "Why is there a bar on that door?" she asked. Elias Carter looked at his hat. "Because you said you'd put a knife in me," he said. "And I figured you'd sleep better if you didn't have to." She slept 14 hours. When she came out of that room the next afternoon, she found a cold cabin with a dead fire, a table with one chair, one plate, one cup, one fork. 9 years of one. The kind of loneliness a man doesn't know he's in, because he built it himself one stone at a time. And a note on the table in bad handwriting. Food in the box. Eat it. Back at dark. E.C. Amelia Hart stood in that room for a long time. Then she took off her ruined dress, put on the plain gray one from the trunk, tied up her hair, and got to work. And if you want to understand this woman, understand that she did not do it out of gratitude. She did it because she had been thrown out of a town for being useless and unwanted. And she had exactly one way left in this world to argue back, and it was with her 2 hands. When Elias Carter came in at dark, the fire was going. The floor was swept. There was a pot on the stove that smelled like food. His shirts, the ones that had been in a heap behind the door since he could not remember, were on a line by the fire washed. And one of them had a new patch at the elbow, small and square and neat. Elias stopped in his own doorway with his hat in his hand and could not move. "Sit down," Amelia said without turning around. "It's not charity, it's arithmetic. You gave me a bed. I'm evening it out. I don't like owing." He sat down. She put a plate in front of him and stood there with her arms crossed, daring him to say one soft word, one pitying word, one word that would let her hate him. Elias Carter looked at that plate for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "There's only one chair." "I know. I'll make another." "All right." And he ate and she watched him eat, and neither of them said anything else for a while, and something in that room that had been frozen for 9 years made a small sound like ice on a river in March. Doc Harlan Pike rode out 3 days later ostensibly about a horse. He was 61, and he had been the one to take his hat off in Elias Carter's doorway 9 years ago, and he had never gotten over it, and there was not a man in that valley who loved Elias more or knew him less. He came in, and he saw the second chair, and he saw the curtains, and he saw a woman at the table with a ledger open and a pen in her hand, and Harlan Pike stopped dead. "Doc," Elias said. "Elias, this is Miss Hart." "Ma'am," Harlan said, and took his hat off, and Amelia saw his eyes do the thing she was already learning to see coming, the little flick, the recalculation, the file drawer opening in a man's head, labeled "Oh, her." "You've heard about me," Amelia said. Harlan Pike, to his everlasting credit, did not lie. "Yes, ma'am, I have." "What did you hear, Miss Hart?" "No, please." She set the pen down. "I'd like to know. I've been in this territory 9 days, and I've been refused a room, a job, a church, and a laundry, and not one living soul has told me to my face what I'm supposed to have done. So please, you're a doctor, you're a man of science. Tell me the diagnosis." Harlan looked at Elias. Elias said nothing. "They say you left a child," Harlan said. "She was my sister's. She's dead. Scarlet fever, 1881. They say there's a husband. There is no husband. There has never been a husband. There was a man in Baltimore who wanted one thing and did not get it, and I have not seen him in 6 years. They say," Harlan said slower now, watching her, "that Josiah Bell looked you over on that coach platform and saw something in your face that told him everything he needed to know." Amelia Hart smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Doctor," she said, "would you like to know what Josiah Bell saw on that platform?" "Ma'am." "He saw Ellen Marsh." The name landed in the room like a dropped plate. Elias Carter's head came up. Harlan Pike went the color of paper. "That's the banker's daughter," Elias said. "Yes." Amelia's voice was perfectly level. "She was on the same coach. She got off 2 minutes before I did. And Josiah Bell was standing there with his flowers in his hand, and his hat brushed, waiting for a mail-order bride from Baltimore, with no family and no money. And instead, he watched Marcus Marsh's only child come home from school in a traveling coat that cost more than his boarding house." "Miss Hart," Harlan said. "He handed her the flowers," Amelia said. Nobody breathed. "He handed her the flowers," she said again. in front of 40 people, and he said something that made her laugh, and then he turned around and saw me standing there with my trunk, and I watched a man do arithmetic in his head. It took him 4 seconds. I have never in my life seen anything so fast or so cold. And then he walked over to me, and he took my hand, and he said, "Miss Hart, we're going to have to be very careful here." And I thought, God forgive me. I thought he meant careful of my reputation. She laughed once. It was a terrible sound. "He meant his," she said. "He needed a reason to throw me out that would make him the hero of it. So he took the worst grief of my life out of a letter I wrote him, and he put it in the street." The fire popped. Harlan Pike sat down slowly in the chair Elias had made her 3 days ago, and said very quietly, "The Marsh girl's engagement's in the paper Thursday." "Yes," Amelia said. "I imagine it is." Now here is the thing that mattered, and it is not the thing you think. Harlan Pike rode home that night believing her. That was one. And one was not enough, because Harlan Pike, 61 years old doctor to that entire valley, a good man, a decent man, a man who had cried in his own barn 9 years ago over a woman he couldn't save. Harlan Pike got home and sat down and thought about Marcus Marsh, who held the note on his house. And Harlan Pike said nothing to anybody for 11 weeks. That is how towns work. That is exactly precisely how it works, and anyone who tells you different has never lived in one. October went. The rumor did not. It got better. That's what rumors do, they improve. By the end of the month, it wasn't just that Amelia Hart was a fallen woman. It was that Elias Carter had known. That he'd known and taken her anyway. That the lonesome rancher out on the East Road had finally cracked 9 years a widower and gone and bought himself something warm for the winter. He heard it the first Saturday of November in the Mercantile from Dutch Corliss, who did not know Elias was behind the flour barrels. "Well, he ain't a monk, is he?" Dutch was saying. 9 years. I'd have done it in 3. Somebody laughed. "Course he'll turn her out come spring," Dutch said. "Man's got sense. You don't marry that. You just—" Elias Carter came around the flour barrels. The store went silent so fast that Mr. Kessler dropped a scoop. "Say the rest," Elias said. Dutch Corliss was a big man. He was bigger than Elias. He was also 30 pounds of that big in his belly, and he had never in his life been looked at the way he was being looked at right then. "Elias now." "You had a sentence going," Elias said. "You just finish it." "I didn't mean nothing." "Finish it." "Elias." "Finish the sentence, Dutch." And Dutch Corliss looked around that store for help, and 11 grown men looked at their boots, and Dutch Corliss said, "It was just talk." Elias Carter stood there, breathing for about 4 seconds. Then he did the thing that nobody expected, the thing they talked about for a month. He set his money on the counter for flour, coffee, sugar nails, and a bolt of blue cloth, and he said to the whole store, in a voice that carried, "Miss Hart pulls a full share of work at my place. She's on wages. There's a bar on the inside of her door that I cut myself the first night, and there's a bill of her hours in my ledger that any man in this room is welcome to write out and read." Silence. "Any man," Elias said. "Right now. I'll saddle a horse for you." Nobody moved. Nobody ever does. "That's what I figured," Elias Carter said, and picked up his flour and walked out. He did not tell her about it. She found out anyway because Kessler's boy delivered the nails, and Kessler's boy was 14 and could not hold a secret in a bucket. Amelia came out into the yard where Elias was working with a hammer in her hand and her face absolutely white. "You put me in your ledger." Elias didn't look up. "Yes, ma'am." "You put me on wages." "Yes, ma'am." "Without asking me, then?" "Yes, ma'am." She threw the hammer. It went past his ear and hit the barn wall and stuck there, and Elias Carter straightened up very slowly and looked at the hammer and then looked at her and said, "That'd have killed a man." "I missed," Amelia said. "On purpose. Do you know what you've done?" "I told the truth." "You told the truth for me." She was shaking. Do you know what that does? Do you have any idea? Now it's your word. Now it's Elias Carter's honor against Josiah Bell's, and I'm the thing being argued about. I'm the cow, Mr. Carter. I'm the disputed cow, and when it's over, one of you will have won, and I will still be nothing at all. Elias Carter opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because she was right. That was the thing. She was so completely brutally right that he stood there in his own yard with 9 years of silence in his throat and could not find one word. I have been defended before, Amelia said. Quieter. Worse. My father defended me. He stood up in a parlor in Baltimore, and he said my daughter is a good girl, and everyone nodded, and I lost every friend I had by Sunday. Being defended by a man is how a woman finds out she isn't allowed to speak. Miss Hart? So don't. Her voice cracked. Don't do it again. Don't you ever do it again. If you want to help me, then let me earn it out loud where they can see until they have to say it themselves. I don't want your word. I want their silence. Do you understand the difference? And Elias Carter, who had built a wall 9 stones high and never once in his life said a soft thing out loud, said no. Amelia blinked. No, he said again. I don't understand it. I'm not a smart man, ma'am. I've been alone 9 years and I forgot how people work if I ever knew. But I know Dutch Corliss said something about you in a store, and my hands went numb, and I have not felt my hands go numb since the night my wife died, and I don't know what that means, and it scares me half to death. The wind moved across the yard. Amelia Hart stood there with her mouth slightly open. So no. Elias said, I don't understand the difference, but I'll do what you say. I won't say another word in that town. Not one. He went and pulled the hammer out of the barn wall and handed it back to her handle first. That's a good throw, he said. You want to work on the follow-through. 3 days later, she found the box. She was not snooping. She would say that for the rest of her life, and it was true, she was after a length of rope in the loft, and the box came down when she moved a saddle, and it opened, and it was all over the floor before she could stop it. A dress. Blue small-waisted folded 9 years. A pair of little knit booties unfinished. 1.5. And a wooden cradle in the corner under a tarp, sanded, oiled, never used. And Amelia Hart knelt on that loft floor with a booty in her hand, and finally, 9 days of held-back grief came out of her all at once, and she cried so hard she couldn't breathe, and she was still crying when Elias came up the ladder. He saw the box. He saw her. He stood on that ladder for a long time. Her name was Sarah, he said. I'm sorry. Sarah Ann Carter. She was 24. She wanted a girl. He climbed the rest of the way up and sat down on the floor across from her, which he had never done in his life, sat down on a floor like a boy. The baby was a girl. I don't know if she knew that before. I've thought about it about 10,000 times. Whether she knew. Elias. I rode 19 miles for Harlan Pike, he said. 19 miles in the dark. And I got him back here by sunup, and he took his hat off in that door, and I have not asked one human being for one thing since. He looked at the booty in her hand. That's the closest I've come to talking about it, he said. In 9 years. That right there. Amelia held out the booty. Elias Carter looked at it, and then he did not take it. He closed his hand around hers, around her hand, and the booty, both one time hard, for exactly 2 seconds, and then he let go, and stood up, and went down the ladder. She sat on that floor for an hour. She was still holding the booty when she came down. The letter came the 2nd week of November. Amelia was at the table with the ledger. She had found by then that Elias Carter had been cheated by the cattle buyer 4 years running to the tune of $900, that he had never once checked a weight ticket, and that he owed money at 11% to a bank he had never set foot in. Marcus Marsh, she said that morning, tapping the page. Elias grunted. Elias, your note is held by Marcus Marsh. Everybody's is. Elias, she looked up. Marcus Marsh is about to be Josiah Bell's father-in-law. And Elias Carter stopped with his coffee halfway to his mouth. He sat down. He had not thought of it. Not once. He was a man who could read weather 3 days out, and could not read a room to save his life. And Amelia watched it arrive on his face, watched him understand at 38 that the man who had destroyed her was about to own the paper on his ranch. "How much?" she said. "$1,100. Due by March. Can you pay it?" Elias Carter looked at the table for a long moment. "No," he said. That was Tuesday. Thursday, the boy from the freight office rode out with a letter for Miss A. Hart, care of the Carter Place East Road, and the handwriting on the front made every drop of blood leave her face. She knew it. 11 letters worth of knowing it. "It's from him," she said. Elias came in off the porch. She turned it over twice. She did not open it. "He wants something," she said. "Open it." "No, you don't understand. He wants something. That man does not spend a stamp without wanting something." Amelia. First time. First time in 6 weeks he'd used her name and it stopped her cold. "Open it." She opened it. She read it standing up. She read it twice. And Elias Carter watched a woman go from white to something worse than white, and then she laughed one hard, awful bark of a laugh, and she put the letter on the table and pushed it across to him. "Read it." He read it. It was 4 sentences long. "Miss Hart, circumstances have altered. I find my affections were misjudged and my conduct hasty. I am prepared to make full restitution publicly and to honor my original offer with an additional sum of $500 in acknowledgement of the distress caused. Reply by Friday. J. Bell." Elias Carter set that letter down very carefully, the way a man sets down something that might go off. "He wants to marry you," he said. "No," Amelia said. "He wants me gone." "That's not what it says, Elias." She leaned on the table with both hands. Think. Think. Why now he threw me in the mud in September? Why does he want me back in November? Because Ellen Marsh found out, Amelia said. Because somebody told that girl what happened on that platform. Because a rich man's daughter got engaged to a man who publicly ruined a woman to make room for her. And now Marcus Marsh has a problem, and the problem has a name, and the name is Amelia Hart, living 11 miles east with a witness. Elias sat down. $500, Amelia said. Elias, $500 is not an apology. $500 is a price. He is buying a signature. He is buying a woman who will stand up in that town and say it was all a misunderstanding. Mr. Bell behaved as a gentleman, and then he is going to put me on a train, and by summer I will be a story they tell about the crazy Eastern woman who lied, and Josiah Bell will be a banker. She was breathing hard. "And do you know the worst of it?" she said. "Do you know the very worst? Say it. I want to take it." The fire cracked. $500. Amelia Hart said, and her voice finally broke all the way through. $500 and my name back. Do you know what I've got right now? I've got a trunk, a dead niece, and a bar on the inside of a door. I have been refused by a church Elias. And that man, that worthless man, can hand me my whole life back across a table with one signature, and I have to sit here and be noble about it. Then take it. She stopped. What? Take it. Elias Carter stood up. Take the money. Take your name. Get on the train. That's ma'am. That's the right thing. That's the sensible. Don't you dare, Amelia said. I've got 1,100 due in March, and 109 head and a bad shoulder, and you've got 4 years of Latin and hands that can fix anything, and you are 31 years old, and you are sitting in a cold cabin in Wyoming territory, darning the shirts of a man who... He stopped. Of a man who what? Amelia said. Elias Carter stood in the middle of his own kitchen with his hands open at his sides. Say it, she said. I don't have the words, he said. I have never had the words. Sarah used to. She used to say things, and I'd just nod, and I thought that was enough. And then she died, and I have thought every single day for 9 years about what I never said, and now there's you, and I still don't have them. Try. Amelia. Try. And Elias Carter said, There's 2 chairs in this house. She stared at him. "There's been one chair in this house for 9 years," he said. "And I made a second one in the dark on the third night because you'd stood up the whole time you watched me eat and I couldn't stand it. And that's the whole of it. That's everything I've got. There's 2 chairs in this house now, and if you take that money and get on that train, I will still eat at a table with 2 chairs every night for the rest of my life, and I will never move it. That's what I've got instead of words." The clock ticked 11 times. Amelia Hart picked up the letter. She looked at it for a long, long moment. "Reply by Friday," she said. "Yes." "He gave me 2 days." "Yes." She folded it once very precisely and put it in her apron pocket. "Elias," she said, "how much is your note again?" "1,100. "And he's offering 5. "Yes." Amelia Hart looked up, and there was something in her face that Elias Carter had never seen on a human being, and it scared him worse than the blizzard did. "He offered 500 by letter," she said softly. "Elias, a man who's cornered doesn't open at his highest number. He opens low." "What are you—" "I'm saying he'll go to 1,000. She was already moving. "I'm saying he'll go to 1,500 because Marcus Marsh's daughter is not going to marry a man. The whole territory is laughing at, and the wedding is December. I'm saying I've been sitting here for 6 weeks with nothing to trade, and this morning that man handed me a piece of paper in his own handwriting admitting his conduct was hasty." She held up the letter. "This isn't a bribe," Amelia Hart said. "This is a confession, and he mailed it to me." Elias Carter stared at her. "Amelia," he said slowly, "what are you going to do?" And Amelia Hart smiled the same smile she'd worn in the mud on the day the whole town decided she was nothing, and said, "I'm going to answer him Friday. In person. In town. That town will eat you alive." "Yes," she said. "In front of everybody." She put her hand on the door. "Elias," she said without turning around, "you said you don't have the words." "No, ma'am." "You're wrong." Her voice was not steady. "You said there's 2 chairs in this house. That's the finest thing anybody has ever said to me in my entire life. And I have been to a girls' academy, and I have read Mr. Shakespeare." And then she went out, and the door shut, and Elias Carter stood alone in a kitchen with 2 chairs in it, and put his hand over his mouth, and stayed that way for a long, long time. Outside, the sky in the north had gone the color of a bruise, and a wind came down off the mountains, carrying the first hard flakes of the worst winter Red Valley would see in 40 years. Orchestrated narrative structure, void multiple twists. Dialogue-driven storytelling for dramatic pacing. Orchestrated narrative structure. Void multiple twists. Dialogue-driven storytelling for dramatic pacing. She was at the barn before he got his coat on. "Amelia, don't." Amelia put the bridle down. "I'm not putting the bridle down." She didn't look at him. Her hands were shaking so bad she'd already dropped the cheek strap twice, and she picked it up a third time, and it slid straight through her fingers, and she said a word that would have gotten her put out of a Baltimore parlor. Elias Carter reached past her and took the bridle off the peg and held it against his chest. "Give me that." "No, ma'am." "Elias, so help me." "You're going to town," he said. "Fine, that's your business, you told me plain, and I heard you. But you're not going 11 miles on that mare in November, because that mare's got a walleye, and she'll dump you in a creek, and you'll die out there. And then Josiah Bell wins for free." Amelia stopped. "So I'm driving you," Elias said, "in the wagon, and I'll sit in that wagon with my mouth shut and my hands on my knees, and I will not say one word in that town exactly like you told me. But I'm driving you." She stood there breathing. "That's the arrangement," Elias said. "Take it or walk." "You're a very stubborn man." "Yes, ma'am." "How does anybody stand you?" "They don't," Elias said. "That's sort of the whole situation." And Amelia Hart laughed a short, cracked, unwilling laugh, the kind that gets out before you can stop it, and then her face crumpled for about half a second, and she turned around fast so he wouldn't see it. and Elias Carter looked at the back of her head and understood with a clarity that frightened him that she was more scared right now than she had been the night he found her dying in the grass. "It's 20 degrees, he said. "Get the blue coat." "I don't have a blue coat." "It's on your bed," Elias said, and went to hitch the horses. My, she found it there. Blue wool plain cut wide in the shoulders and taken in wrong at the waist by a man who had clearly never done it before and had done it anyway 4 times, judging by the stitch holes. The bolt of blue cloth from Kessler's. He'd bought it the day he came around the flour barrels. She stood in that room holding a coat and did not cry and did not cry, and then put it on and walked out and got in the wagon and said, "It's crooked." "Yes, ma'am. The left sleeve is an inch long." "That's the arm you throw with," Elias said, and clucked to the horses. They rode 4 miles before she said anything. "You should know what's going to happen." "All right." "He'll have a lawyer." "All right." "He'll have a lawyer and a paper already drawn, and he'll be polite, and there will be witnesses he chose, and the whole thing will be arranged so that anything I say sounds like a woman making a scene." She had her hands folded so tight in her lap the knuckles had gone white. "That's the trick, Elias. That's the entire trick, and it's the only one they have. They don't have to win. They just have to make me loud." "So don't be loud." "I am loud." Her voice cracked. I've been loud my whole life. It's the only thing I've got, and it's the exact thing that ruins me every single time, and I have never once in 31 years figured out how to be a woman in a room full of men who have already decided. Elias thought about that for most of a mile. "Can I say a thing," he said, "that I'll probably say wrong?" "Go ahead." When Dutch Corliss was talking in that store, Elias said he was loud, and when I came around them barrels, I wasn't. And ma'am, I've thought about it 100 times since, and the reason that store went quiet wasn't me. It was that Dutch had already said the words out loud, and then had to look at somebody while they were still hanging in the air. Amelia turned her head. "You want them to say it," Elias said. "That's what you told me. You want their silence, but first you want the saying. So don't be loud. Make him be loud. Make that man stand up in a room and say the whole thing with his own mouth and his own voice while people are looking at him." The wagon creaked along. "Elias Carter," Amelia said slowly. "Did you just give me strategic advice?" "No, ma'am." "You absolutely did." "I said a thing about barrels." "That was strategy." "It was about barrels," Elias said, and Amelia Hart laughed out loud in the cold, and for about a mile and a half she wasn't afraid at all. Then they came over the last rise, and she saw the town, and every bit of it came back at once, and she put her hand flat on the seat between them. She did not take his hand. She put her hand on the seat. And after a second, Elias Carter moved his hand about 2 inches, so the side of it touched the side of hers, and neither of them said one word about it, and neither of them moved for the last half mile. Red Valley had 260 people in it, and it felt like all of them were on that street. They weren't. It was maybe 40. It's always maybe 40. But 40 is enough. 40 is a jury, and every one of those 40 stopped what they were doing when the Carter wagon came in, and the sound the street made was not a sound, it was a stopping. "Don't look at them," Amelia said mostly to herself. "I'm not." "I meant me. Don't look at them, Amelia." She looked at them. Mrs. Lyle was in the boarding house window and pulled back from it so fast the curtain swung. Cora Mercer was on the boardwalk with her arm through her husband's, and the Reverend Mercer lifted his hat about 2 inches, and his wife's hand tightened on his elbow, and the hat went back down. And Mr. Fong stood in the door of his laundry and looked straight at Amelia Hart and gave her one small nod. She almost broke right there. That's the truth of it. 9 weeks of being nothing, and the one thing that nearly finished her was a man nodding. "Bank," she said. "Not the boarding house. The bank." The letter said reply to him. But Elias, a man who's cornered, doesn't sit alone in his own house waiting. He sits where the money is. She was already climbing down. "He'll be at Marsh's." He was at Marsh's. The Red Valley Bank and Trust had a front room with a stove and 4 chairs. And in those 4 chairs were Josiah Bell, a lawyer named Tewksbury, who'd come up from Cheyenne on Wednesday, Marcus Marsh, and a 4th man Amelia had never seen and understood in 1 second was there to write things down. Nobody had expected her to come in person. That was the first crack, and she saw it because Josiah Bell stood up too fast, and his chair went back an inch on the floor. "Miss Hart." "Mr. Bell, you had until Friday." "It's Friday," Amelia said. "I meant by post." "You didn't write that," she said pleasantly, and sat down in the chair nobody had offered her. "You wrote reply by Friday. I'm replying by Friday." Tewksbury the lawyer smiled the small smile of a man who has just watched somebody else's client step in a hole. Marcus Marsh did not smile. Marcus Marsh was 55 years old, and he had a soft voice and a soft face, and about as much softness in him as a bank vault, and he looked at Amelia Hart for a long moment, the way a man looks at weather coming. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you'll want to wait outside." "No, sir," Elias said. "This is a private—" "I'll stand right here," Elias said, and went and stood against the wall by the door with his hat in both hands and did not say another word for 40 minutes, and every single person in that room forgot he was there, which was exactly the point. "Well," Tewksbury said, opening a folder, "Miss Hart, we're all glad to resolve this unfortunate business. My client's offer is on the table. $500, a public statement of regret and passage east. I've a document here." "May I see the letter?" Tewksbury paused. "Which letter?" "The one your client sent me." Amelia took it out of her pocket and set it on the table and put one finger on it. "This one. I have it. I only wondered whether you'd read it before he mailed it." The lawyer's eyes flicked one time fast to Marcus Marsh. And Amelia Hart felt her whole chest go cold, because that flick did not go to Josiah Bell. It went to Marsh. "Miss Hart," Tewksbury said smoothly, "the letter's contents aren't—" "He didn't write it," Amelia said. The room got very quiet. "Josiah." She turned and looked at him and used his given name like a slap. "You wrote me 11 letters. 11. I've read every one of them 400 times, and you cannot spell restitution, and you have never in your life used a semicolon." Josiah Bell's face went the color of a wet sheet. "Miss Hart, you spelled believe wrong in all 11, she said. "You spelled it BELEIVE every single time, and I thought it was charming. Do you understand me? I sat on a train for 11 days, and I thought it was charming." Her voice caught, and she killed it dead right there and made it flat again. "And this letter has a semicolon in it, so no, you didn't write it." Nobody spoke. "Mr. Marsh wrote it," Amelia said. "That is a serious accusation," Tewksbury said. "It's not an accusation, it's spelling," Amelia said. "Which one of you would like to write the word believe on a piece of paper right now? Because there's 4 grown men in this room, and I'll bet the whole $500 that only one of you gets it wrong." Marcus Marsh laughed. That was the thing that scared her. He laughed a real laugh, warm, delighted, and leaned back in his chair and said, "Tewksbury, sit down. She's ahead of you." "Mr. Marsh, sit down." Marsh took off his spectacles and cleaned them on his sleeve, taking his time, and Amelia understood she had just been promoted from an inconvenience to an opponent, and that this was much, much worse. "Miss Hart, yes, I wrote the letter." "Mr. Marsh, as your counsel, I have to—" "You have to be quiet," Marsh said. "Miss Hart, I'll tell you the whole of it because I've watched you 3 minutes, and I don't think there's any percentage in lying to you, and I'm too old to enjoy it anyway. Josiah's engaged to my daughter. That was arranged in September. And on the 29th of October, my daughter came into my office and asked me a question about a woman named Amelia Hart, and I did not have a good answer." "Papa," Josiah started. Marsh's head turned 2 inches. "Don't ever call me that again," he said, "in a room where I'm working." The silence after that had a texture to it. "So," Marsh said, turning back comfortable as a man in his own parlor. "I wrote a letter, and I put $500 in it, which is a great deal of money in this valley, and you know it. And here you are on a Friday. What's your number? I beg your pardon? Your number, Marsh said. Everyone has one. Don't be shy. It's not vulgar. It's just early. Mine's usually about 11 o'clock in the morning. Amelia looked at him. I don't have a number, she said. Everyone. Mr. Marsh, I've been thrown out of a church, Amelia said. By your daughter's future mother-in-law's dearest friend on a Tuesday. Do you know what a number is? A number is what you have when you still believe the transaction is honest. I don't have one anymore. You people took it. And Marcus Marsh for the first time stopped smiling. 1,000? he said. No. 1,500? No. $2,000, Miss Hart, and a letter of character from me personally, and I will put you on a coach to Denver, where nobody has ever heard of any of this, and you will be able to buy a house. Elias Carter against the wall did not move, but his hands closed on his hat brim so hard the crown buckled. $2,000. Amelia Hart sat in that chair, and God help her, she saw it. All of it. In about a second and a half, she saw a house with a green door, and a room with books in it, and a life where nobody knew where she could walk into a store and be nobody. Just a woman buying flour, and she wanted it so badly that her eyes stung. That's a real offer, she said. It's a very real offer. You'd pay $2,000 to make me not exist. I'd pay it to make a problem not exist, Marsh said. You're taking it personally. Don't. That's the mistake everyone makes. My daughter is 19 and she is going to marry this young man in December because it is a good match and it has been arranged, and you are a fact that is inconvenient to that. And $2,000 is what facts cost. There's nothing personal in this room, Miss Hart. Not one thing. Mr. Marsh, Amelia said, there is nothing else in this room. She stood up. Josiah, she said, stand up. What? Stand up. And here is a thing that will never be explained. Josiah Bell stood up. He was 32, and he was about to be a rich man's son-in-law, and there were 4 people watching him, and a woman in a crooked blue coat told him to stand up, and he stood up. I don't want your money, Amelia said. I want 3 things, and I'm going to say all 3, and then you're going to say no to all 3, and that will be the end of it, and I'll go home. Miss Hart. First, you will give me back my letters. All 11 and the ones I sent you, and particularly the 3rd one. Josiah Bell's face changed. Amelia saw it. Everyone saw it. Even the man writing things down looked up. You don't have them, she said. Josiah, where are my letters? There, it's a private. Where are my letters? I burned them, Josiah Bell said. And it was such an obvious, clumsy, boyish lie that Marcus Marsh actually closed his eyes. He didn't burn them, Marsh said wearily. God in heaven, boy. Sir, he showed them to my daughter, Marsh said, in September, to explain why the arrangement had changed. He showed a 19-year-old girl a stranger's private correspondence to demonstrate his own good judgment, and she has not spoken a civil word to him since, and that Miss Hart is the actual reason there is $2,000 on this table. Amelia Hart did not move. She stood absolutely still in the middle of that room, and she thought about 6 pages about a little girl named Ruth, written at midnight on a train in a cramped hand because the paper was expensive. He showed her Ruth, she said. Yes. He handed a stranger my dead child. She wasn't your... Josiah started and did not get to finish because Amelia Hart's voice came out of her at a volume that rattled the stovepipe. She was 4 years old, and she died holding my hand. And there it was, loud, exactly the way she'd sworn to herself for 11 miles that she would not be. The room did not laugh at her. That was the thing she never expected and never forgot. Tewksbury looked at the floor. The note-taker put down his pen. And Marcus Marsh, who had not felt a single thing in that room, who had told her plainly there was nothing personal in it, Marcus Marsh looked away. Josiah Bell sat back down without being told to. Second thing, Amelia said. Her voice was ruined. She used it anyway. You will stand in that street on Sunday after church, when everybody's out, not in here, not in a paper in the street where you did it, and you will say out loud in your own voice, I lied about Amelia Hart to get out of a promise I made her because a richer woman got off the coach first. That's not, say it now, she said. Practice. Miss Hart, say it now, Josiah. I can't, he said. Why not? And Josiah Bell, cornered, sweating, 32 years old, and about to be handed a bank, said the truest sentence of his entire life. Because then I'd be a man who did that. The stove ticked. Yes, Amelia said quietly. You would. Yeah, she got as far as the door. You said 3, Marcus Marsh said. She stopped with her hand on it. You said 3 things, Miss Hart. You've named 2. I'm a banker. I notice when the column doesn't add. Amelia turned around. And Elias Carter, standing against that wall with a buckled hat and 40 minutes of silence in him, saw her look at him for a quarter of a second. Just a flick, just a question, and he gave the smallest shake of his head she had ever seen. Don't. She turned back to Marsh. The 3rd one's mine, she said. I'll keep it. Now that, Marsh said, is interesting. Good day, Mr. Marsh. Miss Hart. He stood up. He was courteous about it. That was the horror of the man. He was always courteous. Before you go, a small matter of business unrelated. Mr. Carter, your note with this institution. $1,140 at 11% secured against the east section and the improvements. Elias didn't move. March. Yes, that's what I wanted to mention, Marsh said. There's a demand clause. Page 2. It's standard, every note this bank writes has it. I'd be a fool otherwise. It permits the institution to call the full balance at 30 days upon a material change in the borrower's circumstances. The room went very still. What material change? Elias said. 4 words. The first 4 in 40 minutes. You've taken on a dependent, Marcus Marsh said. Amelia's hand came off the door. She's on wages, Elias said. That's worse, Marsh said gently. A dependent eats. An employee eats and gets paid. Mr. Carter? I'm not moralizing. I don't care what happens in your house. I've never cared. I'm the only man in this valley who genuinely does not care. I'm looking at a ledger, and the ledger says a man running 109 head with a bad shoulder and a $900 hole he doesn't know about took on a second mouth in October. He knows about the hole, Amelia said. Marsh's eyebrows went up half an inch. He knows about it because I found it, she said. 4 years of short waits from Dodson's buyer, $912, and I have every ticket. So don't sell me a story about ledgers, Mr. Marsh. I've read his. Have you read yours? For 1 full second, Marcus Marsh said nothing. Then he said, 30 days, Mr. Carter. You'd do that, Elias said. I've already done it, Marsh said. The letter went out Wednesday. You'll find it at your freight office. I'm telling you now as a courtesy so you don't hear it from a boy. Wednesday. Amelia felt it land. Wednesday was before the offer. Wednesday was before she'd walked in this door, before she'd said 1 word, before she'd refused anything. He hadn't called the note because she'd said no. He'd called it so she'd say yes. You did it first, she said. Miss Hart. You called his note first, she said, and her voice was almost admiring, and that was the most frightening thing she'd done all day. You called it Wednesday, so that when I sat down here today with your $2,000 in front of me, and I said no, I wouldn't be saying no for me. I'd be saying no for him. She pointed at Elias without looking at him. You didn't buy me, Mr. Marsh. You just made sure that if I don't sell, I'm the one who takes his ranch. Marcus Marsh put his spectacles back on. Miss Hart, he said, you're the first person to walk into this room in 19 years who understood the terms. That's not a compliment. No, Marsh agreed. It isn't. She got out of that building and made it 11 steps and then had to grab the hitching rail, and Elias Carter came out behind her and stood there and did not touch her because he'd learned that much. Amelia, don't. Amelia. Don't say it's all right. Don't say it doesn't matter. Don't say you'll manage. Don't you dare stand there and be fine about it. I was going to say the wagon's the other way, Elias said. She laughed. It came out like a sob and turned into a laugh and turned back, and she stood there holding a hitching rail in the town that had ruined her. Laughing and not crying, and Elias Carter waited. 30 days, she said finally. Yes, ma'am. That's December 14th. Somewhere around. Elias. She turned around. Take the money. No. You didn't even... No, Elias said. It's $2,000, she said. It's your note twice over. You'd be clear. You'd be clear, Elias, for the first time in your whole life. And all it costs is a signature from a woman you found in a field 9 weeks ago. Amelia. And I'd go to Denver and buy a house with a green door, and you'd have your ranch. And that is arithmetic. You like arithmetic, you... There's 2 chairs in that house, Elias Carter said. And Amelia Hart stopped talking. That's all I've got, he said. I told you already, I'm not going to get any better at it. So you can holler at me about arithmetic all the way home if you want, and I'll listen, because I like listening to you. That's that's about the only thing in 9 years I've liked. But the answer's not going to change, and it wouldn't change if it was 10,000, and I don't have a reason that would satisfy a banker. Amelia Hart looked at him for a long moment. You are the most infuriating human being who has ever lived, she said. Yes, ma'am. Get the wagon. Ellen Marsh caught them at the edge of town. She was on foot. She was 19, and she was wearing a coat that cost more than the boarding house, and she had actually run in that coat in front of people, and she came up on the wagon out of breath and grabbed the wheel with her bare hand. Miss Hart. Get away from this wagon, Amelia said. Please. I said, get away from this wagon. I have had enough of your family for one lifetime. He showed me your letters, Ellen Marsh said. Amelia's hands went still on her lap. I want you to know that I didn't ask, Ellen said. Fast, breathless, the whole thing coming out in a rush, like she'd been holding it for 6 weeks, and it had gone bad in her. He came to the house in September, and he sat in our parlor, and he said, I'll show you what kind of woman she is, and he read one out loud, in front of my mother. He read it out loud. Miss Hart, he did a voice. Stop. And my mother laughed, and I sat there, and I didn't say anything, and then I went upstairs, and I was sick. Stop. I have the letter, Ellen Marsh said. Everything stopped. He left it on the table, she said. He left it there like it was a napkin. I took it upstairs. I've had it since September 22nd, and I've read it maybe 200 times, and I can't. Miss Hart, I can't sleep. I'm 19. I'm supposed to be married in 8 weeks. And every night I lie there, and I think about a woman I never met writing 6 pages about a little girl on a train, and I think that's a person, and my father is downstairs deciding what she costs. Amelia Hart could not speak. Give it to her, Elias said quietly. I can't, Ellen said. Not here. Why not? Because he'll know it's gone, Ellen said. And he'll know from where. And she was crying now badly, 19 years old on a public street. And Miss Hart, you don't understand my father. You had one afternoon with him. I've had my whole life. He didn't call Mr. Carter's note to hurt you. He called it because it was tidy. He'll do it and go to supper and ask me about my day. Then keep it, Amelia said. Ellen blinked. What? Keep it? Amelia leaned down off that wagon seat and took the girl's cold bare hand off the wheel and held it in both of hers, and it was the first kind thing she had done in 9 weeks, and it nearly killed her. Ellen, listen to me. You're 19, and you've done nothing wrong, and you're about to. That's the whole shape of it. That's the entire shape of your life right now, and you can see it, which is worse. Miss Hart, keep the letter, Amelia said. Don't hand it to me on a street where 4 people are watching. Keep it and read it 200 more times, and then on some day that I can't predict you will be in a room where it matters, and you'll know. Know what? Whether you're your father's daughter? Amelia said. Ellen Marsh stood there in the road with her hand in a stranger's. "That's cruel," she whispered. "Yes," Amelia said. "I learned it here." They were 3 miles out before Elias spoke. "You could have had that letter." "Yes. That letter's proof. That letter in front of the Reverend Mercer on a Sunday, that letter is a 19-year-old girl's life," Amelia said. "And I am not going to spend it. I've had my life spent by other people. I know what it costs, and I know it doesn't come back." Elias drove a while. "That was the third thing," he said. "Wasn't it? The one you wouldn't say to Marsh?" Amelia didn't answer. "You were going to ask for the girl," Elias said. "You were going to ask him to let his daughter out of it." "Drive the horses, Elias." "That's why you looked at me." "Drive the horses." "And I told you no," Elias said, and his voice did something she'd never heard it do. "I shook my head at you, because I thought you were going to ask about my note. I thought you were going to beg that man for my $1,100, and I couldn't stand it. That's what I thought you were about to do, and I told you no, and I was wrong, and I have been sitting here for 3 miles about to be sick." "Elias, you were going to try and save a girl you never met," he said, "in the middle of the worst day of your life, from a man who was calling my note while he smiled at you, and I shook my head at you." Amelia Hart put her hand on the seat between them, and this time Elias Carter didn't move his hand 2 inches. He took hers whole in his and held it and drove one-handed for the last 8 miles, and neither of them said one word, and both of them knew exactly what had happened, and neither one of them was ready to know it. The demand letter was at the freight office. She read it out loud at the kitchen table while he stood. $1,140.11. Payable in full on or before December the 14th, 1884. Failing, which the east section, the improvements, the house, and all stock thereon. All stock thereon. "Every cow," Amelia said. "Yes, ma'am." "Every cow, Elias, and the house." I read it. 9 years, she said. "You built this in 9 years with a bad shoulder, and you never once asked anybody for anything, and a man wrote 3 sentences on a Wednesday." "Amelia." He sat down across from her. "Look at me." She looked. "How much money do we have?" Elias said. "We." "How much?" She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, once angry about it. 260 in the tin. 211 if we're honest, because 60 of that's what you owe Kessler and you don't know it. Call it 200. "And the note's 1140. "Yes." "And the cattle." 109 head, Amelia said, and then she stopped and she went absolutely still, and Elias Carter watched a thing happen on her face that he would remember on his deathbed. 109 head, she said again. "Amelia." "Elias, what are cattle worth in November?" "Nothing. Buyers are gone. Dodson takes him in October, and he's back east by—" "Dodson," Amelia said. "What about him?" "Dodson's buyer has been short-waiting you 4 years running," she said, and she was already up at the shelf, already dragging the ledger down and the shoebox of tickets after it. $912.22, Elias. I have the 22 cents, I have every ticket, I have his own scale numbers in his own clerk's hand, and I have 4 years of your tally book to set beside them. And Elias, look at me. A man who has stolen $912 from a customer does not want that customer standing in a stockyard in Cheyenne in December saying so out loud. Elias Carter stared at her. "That's not selling cattle," he said slowly. That's collecting a debt," Amelia said. "It's the most legitimate thing in this house. He owes you $912, and I can prove it on paper, and I'll do it in front of anybody he likes." 900's not 1140. "No." Her eyes were burning. "It's 912, and 200 in the tin is 1112, and the note's 1140. The silence was enormous. "We're $28 short," Amelia Hart said. And Elias Carter laughed. It was the first time she'd heard it. 9 weeks, and it turned out the man had a laugh, a real one, low and rusty, like a gate that hadn't moved in years. And he put his face in his hands and laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. $28, he said. $28. 9 years, Elias said, and it comes down to $28. Elias, we can get $28. We can sell the I'll take in mending. I'll teach the Kessler boy his letters for $1 a week. The 9 head, Elias said. She stopped. What? The 9 head? He'd stopped laughing. The ones I couldn't find. In September. I counted 3 times and came up 9 short, and then I found you, and I never went back for 'em. And every day since I've told myself they went to a neighbor's or the wolves got 'em. Elias. 9 heads about $200, he said. That's $28 7 times over. Amelia's hands had gone cold. Where would they be? North Draws. He was looking at the window now, and she didn't like his face. There's 4 of 'em up under the rimrock. Good grass out of the wind. A cow gets in there in the fall, and she'll stay till she starves because it's easy, and cattle are the stupidest animal God ever made. How far? 7 miles. Elias, it's November. Yes, ma'am. It's the 14th of November, and Mr. Fong told me he said the geese went 3 weeks early, he said. He's been here 11 years and he's never... I know what the geese did, Elias said. He stood up. Elias Carter, sit down. I'm going in the morning. Sit down. Amelia, you listen to me. She was on her feet and around that table, and she had 2 fistfuls of his shirt before she knew she'd moved, and her face was white, and her voice was somewhere she'd never heard it. You listen to me right now. I have been in this territory 9 weeks. In 9 weeks, I have been thrown out of a boarding house, a church, a laundry, and a school. A man read my dead niece's name out loud in a parlor to make a rich girl laugh. I have had $2,000 offered to me to stop existing, and I said no to every single one of them. Elias, everyone. And do you know why? Do you know why? Amelia. Because of 2 chairs, she said, and her voice came apart. Because a man who can't talk built a 2nd chair in the dark on the 3rd night. That's it. That's my whole reason. That's everything I traded $2,000 for, and a house with a green door and my name back, and you are standing in this kitchen telling me you're going to ride into the North Draws in the middle of November for $28. 200, Elias said. I don't care. The room rang. Elias Carter looked down at the 2 fists in his shirt. Ma'am, he said very quietly, let go. No. Amelia, no. She was crying now, finally 9 weeks of it, and she was furious about it, and she didn't stop. You don't get to do this. You don't get to be the one who you found me in a field. Elias, you found me dying in a field, and you were rude to me about the frozen ground, and you made me a chair, and you bought a bolt of blue cloth, and sewed the sleeve wrong 4 times, and now you want to go out in the snow and leave me here in this house alone, and I have already done that. Do you understand me? I have already sat in a room and watched somebody I loved stop breathing, and I cannot do it twice. Elias Carter stood absolutely still. Say that again, he said. What? The middle part, Elias said. Amelia Hart's hands opened. She let go of his shirt and stepped back and put her hand over her mouth and stood there in a cold kitchen, having just said out loud by accident in a fight the thing she had not admitted to herself in 9 weeks. Neither of them moved. Amelia, Elias said. Don't. Amelia, I've got to say a thing wrong. Don't. I've been trying for 2 hours to figure the words, he said, and I don't have 'em, and I'm never going to have 'em, and I'm 38, and I already did this once. I already had a woman in this house, and I never told her one single thing, and she died on a Tuesday, and I have had 9 years to think about the sentences I didn't say. Elias, so here's what I've got. He was breathing hard, a man who hadn't raised his voice in a decade. I don't want the ranch. I want you at the table. That's ma'am. That's it. That's the entire thing. That's 9 years and 109 cows and $1,100. And if that man takes every stick of it in December, I will build another one, but I can't build you. and I have known that since the third night when I cut a bar for the inside of a door, so a woman I'd never met could sleep, and I have been too much of a coward to say it out loud for 9 weeks. Amelia Hart could not breathe. "That's the best I can do," Elias said, and she crossed that kitchen and put her hands on either side of his face, this big, ruined, weather-cut man who looked 50 and had a rusty laugh, and she said, "It's better than Shakespeare," and kissed him. He was gone before light. She knew he would be. That was the thing she knew she'd known while she was kissing him. She'd known when he held her by the stove for an hour without saying anything. And she'd let herself believe it anyway for about 4 hours, which is the only real sin she ever committed in her life. There was a note on the table. 9 head, back by dark. Then we'll talk about the 28 EC. And under it, in worse handwriting pressed so hard it tore the paper, "I love you. I said it wrong. I'll do better tonight." Amelia Hart stood in that kitchen holding a piece of paper. Then she went to the window. It had started at some point in the night, quiet the way the bad ones do, and the yard was gone, and the barn was a gray shape, and the north was not there at all. There was no north. There was a white wall standing where the mountains had been, and it was moving, and the sound coming off it was not wind. It was something else, something low. And Mr. Fong had been in this valley 11 years, and the geese had gone 3 weeks early. She got the blue coat. She got the lantern and the rope off the hitching post that she'd cut in September and never thrown away. And she stood in that doorway with the storm hitting her flat in the face, and she screamed his name into it once. The snow took it. It didn't even echo. It just took it, like it took everything else in that valley. Like the town had taken her name, and Marsh had taken his note, and God had taken Sarah Carter on a Tuesday 9 years ago. And Amelia Hart stood in a doorway in Wyoming territory and understood that she was going out into it. Orchestrated climactic narrative arc, voice storm redemption, the public declaration. She got about 200 yards. That's the truth of it, and she was ashamed of it for the rest of her life, and it was not her fault. She got to the end of the yard where the fence should have been, and the fence was not there, and she put her hand out into a white nothing, and the wind took the lantern off the wire like a man snatching a hat, and it was gone. Just gone. And Amelia Hart stood in the middle of a place she had lived for 9 weeks, and could not tell you which direction the house was. She turned around. That was the thing nobody understands who hasn't been in one. There was no around. She turned, and there was white. She turned again, and there was white. The rope was in her hand, and the rope went nowhere. And a small, clear voice in the back of her head, the one that had gotten her off a train, and through a mud street and across a banker's table, said very calmly, "You are going to die 12 steps from a door, and you will never know it." "No," Amelia said out loud to nobody. She got down on her hands and knees. She could not see the ground either, but she could feel it, and she felt for the wheel ruts, the ones the wagon had cut coming back from town on Friday, and she found them 2 hard grooves under 4 inches of new snow, and she followed them on her hands and knees with her face 6 inches off the earth, sobbing with the wind trying to lift her like a page, and she came up against the porch post so hard it split her lip. She got inside. She got the door shut. It took both hands and her shoulder and a full minute. Then Amelia Hart lay on the floor of that kitchen with the snow melting in her hair and screamed into her own arm until her throat was gone. And then she got up. Because there was nothing else. Because that is what she was all the way down, and the town had never once bothered to find out. She could not go north. She had just proved it in the yard. So she did the only arithmetic left. She stoked the fire until the stove ticked. She hung every lamp in the house in the east window and lit them all 4, and burned coal oil like a rich woman, because a lamp in a window is a thing a man can steer at. She dragged the kitchen table across the floor and pushed it under that window so the light sat high. And then she went out with the rope. The same rope she'd cut off a hitching post in September. The same rope that had held her trunk on her back out of that town. And she tied one end to the porch post and the other to the barn door, and made a line a man could hold in the dark. And it took her 40 minutes, and she lost feeling in 3 fingers of her left hand, and she got it done. And then she sat down in his chair facing the door at 11 o'clock in the morning, and she waited. Bull. Here is what nobody in Red Valley ever knew, because Amelia Hart never told a living soul until she was 71 years old and dying and told her granddaughter. She prayed. She had been thrown out of a church 9 weeks earlier by a woman who filled a doorway with her body, and Amelia Hart had not spoken to God since, on principle, out of spite, the way you don't speak to a relative who did something at a funeral. And at about 4 in the afternoon, she got down on the floor of that kitchen in her coat and said out loud, I know what you'll say. I know I don't get to. And then she said, don't do it twice. That's all. That was the whole prayer. 4 words. Don't do it twice. At 6 o'clock, the light was gone, and the storm had a voice now, a real one, and she went to the door every 10 minutes and opened it 4 inches and shouted his name, and the snow filled her mouth. At 8, she started talking to him, out loud, in the kitchen, to an empty chair. You're a fool, she said. You're a stupid, stubborn, rude man, and I have known you 9 weeks, and I have loved you for 8 of them. And I never said so until last night, and you left before light. Elias, you left before light. At 10, she stopped talking, which was worse. At midnight, she found herself standing in the middle of the room, with the ledger open, adding a column of figures, because her hands had to do something, or she was going to walk out that door and die in the yard. $912.22. 200 in the tin. 1,140 and 11. $28. $28, and the man had gone out into that for it. And Amelia Hart put her head down on a ledger and understood something about Elias Carter that she had been too proud to understand while he was standing in front of her. He had not gone for the money. He'd gone because she'd said the word love in a kitchen, and he had no way on this earth to answer it. That's what a man does when he has no words. He goes and does something. And it is the stupidest, most beautiful, most infuriating fact about the whole sex, and it has killed 100,000 of them, and it very nearly killed this one. He came out of the storm at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. She did not hear him. Nobody could have heard anything. What happened was, the rope moved. She had tied it to the porch post, and she had been sitting with her hand flat on that post through the wall like a fool for 6 hours, and at 20 past 2, the whole house shivered. One time the way it does when something heavy hits the barn end of a line. Amelia Hart went out that door without a coat. She went down that rope, hand over hand, and she found him 40 feet from the barn on his knees in the snow, with one arm over the neck of a horse that was already dead on its feet. And he was not walking. He was falling forward, and catching himself falling, and catching, which is the last thing a body knows how to do. Elias. He looked up. He didn't know her. That was the moment. 9 weeks of everything, and the moment that broke Amelia Hart in half was Elias Carter looking up out of the snow with his eyebrows frozen white and no recognition in his face at all. "Ma'am," he said politely to a stranger, "I've got to get the 9 head. Elias. They're up under the rimrock. Amelia's waiting on me. I told her by dark. Elias, it's me. Have to get back, he said. She'll worry. She don't say so, but she worries. She threw a hammer at me, and Amelia Hart got under a 200-pound man's arm and stood him up. She would tell you she doesn't know how. She would tell you that until the day she died. 119 pounds of Baltimore schoolteacher stood a full-grown rancher up out of the snow at 2 in the morning and walked him 40 feet along a rope with her fist wrapped in it and her shoulder in his ribs. And when he went down at the porch step, she did not try to lift him. She dragged him by the collar backward, 1 stair, 2 across a threshold, and she left blood on the floorboards from her own hands and never noticed it for 2 days. She got the door shut with her back against it, and then she looked at him in the light. His right leg was wrong. She cut the boot off. That's the first thing she did before the coat, before anything, because she'd learned enough by then to know that a boot on a frozen foot is a coffin, and she took the good shears, and she cut $14 of leather off a man who owed $1,100 and had $200 in a tin. The foot came out gray, not white, gray. And Amelia Hart, who had watched a 4-year-old girl die and had helped lay out her own mother, looked at that foot, and heard herself make a sound she did not recognize. "All right," she said. "All right, all right." She did what she knew. She got the wet off him. She got him to the fire, but not at the fire, because her grandmother had said something once about that 40 years ago in a kitchen in Maryland. Never the fire, never the fire. That's how they lose them. She had one sentence from a dead woman, and she built the whole night on it. She got water warm, not hot, testing it on the inside of her own wrist like a mother with a bottle. She got that foot in it. And when the feeling came back, Elias Carter came up off the floor, screaming a sound she had never heard a man make, and she put her whole body across his chest and held him down and said, I know. Stay with me. Stay with me, you stubborn man. That's the pain of it living. That's good. That's good." He passed out at 4. He woke at 6 and didn't know her. He woke at 9 and said, "Sarah." And Amelia Hart sat back on her heels and said quietly, "No, Elias." "Sarah." "No, honey. I'm sorry." Elias Carter said to a woman 9 years dead, "I'm sorry. I rode as fast as I could. I rode 19 miles. I'm sorry." And Amelia put her hand on that ruined face and said, "She knows, Elias. She knows. She's known 9 years." He went under again. Amelia Hart sat on the floor of that kitchen at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 16th of November and thought with perfect clarity, "I cannot do this alone, and there is not one human being in this valley who will come." Tong, she was wrong about that. It took 41 hours to find out. The storm broke at dusk on the 17th, and Amelia Hart, who had not slept in 55 hours, who had a man on her kitchen floor with a leg going the wrong color and a fever of 104, went out to that barn and looked at the wall-eyed mare that would dump her in a creek and kill her. "You and me," she said. She was 4 miles out when she met the wagon. Doc Harlan Pike had been on that road since 2 in the afternoon. He had a sledge, a lantern, 2 blankets, and a boy of 14 named Petey Kessler, who had begged to come, and whose mother did not know where he was. "Miss Hart, his leg's gone gray to the ankle," Amelia said. She said it before she said hello. "Right side. He was out somewhere between 20 and 40 hours. I got the boot off at 2 Sunday morning, and I warmed it in water, not fire, and it came back and he screamed. And it's been swelling since, and it's got a smell now, and there are blisters, and the toes are black, and I have been trying for 2 days to remember if I did the right thing or if I killed him." Harlan Pike stared at her. "You warmed it in water. Was that wrong, Miss Hart?" Harlan Pike said. "How in God's name did you know to do that?" "My grandmother said a sentence in 1849, Amelia said. "Doctor, is he going to lose the foot?" Harlan Pike opened his mouth. And then he was honest, which cost him. "Probably," he said. They got there at 9. Harlan worked for 2 hours and said very little, and the boy Petey held the lamp and did not faint, which Harlan told his mother about later, and made her cry. At 11 o'clock, Harlan Pike came away from that bed and sat down at the table and put his face in his hands. "Tell me," Amelia said. "He'll keep the foot." She had to grab the table. "Miss Hart?" "Say it again." "He'll keep the foot," Harlan Pike said. "Probably 3 toes, maybe 2. The rest of it's alive because somebody warmed it slow and kept it up and didn't let him walk on it. And I want you to understand what I'm telling you, ma'am. I want you to hear it plain because you're going to need it later." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I've been a doctor 34 years. I've cut 9 feet off 9 men in this territory. Every one of those men was found by somebody who did it faster than you did, got 'em to a stove, poured whiskey in 'em, rubbed the leg. Every one. And they all lost it. I didn't know." "You didn't panic," Harlan said. "That's what you did. Ma'am, that's a thing that can't be taught. I've watched grown men with medical training panic in that room. You had 55 hours alone with a delirious 200-pound man, and you did not make one wrong move. And I have been sitting here for an hour trying to figure out how to say this, and there isn't a nice way. He put his hands flat on the table. "You're the best I've ever seen," Harlan Pike said. "And that town threw you out for being a whore." The word landed in the room like a brick through glass. "Doctor—" "No, that's the word," Harlan said. "That's the actual word, Miss Hart. I've heard it 11 times since September, in my own hearing. I want you to know that I've heard it, and I want you to know what I did about it." Amelia looked at him. "Nothing," Harlan Pike said. "I did nothing, for 11 weeks, because Marcus Marsh holds the note on my house." The fire ticked. "I rode out here in October," he said, "and I sat in that chair, and you told me the truth in about 4 minutes, and I believed every word, and then I went home and had my supper. And every Sunday since I have sat in that church and listened to Cora Mercer, and I have not said one word, and I am 61 years old, and I took my hat off in that doorway 9 years ago and told that man his wife was dead, and I have loved him like a son since, and I let his house be talked about because I owe $400. Harlan, I'm not asking you to forgive it," he said. "I'm telling you because you're going to need to know exactly what this valley is made of before the 14th of December." Amelia went still. "You know about the note?" "Ma'am," Harlan Pike said tiredly, "everybody knows about the note. It's been in that bank's book since Wednesday, and Marsh's clerk has a mouth on him. There isn't a soul in Red Valley who doesn't know that Elias Carter has 27 days. Petey Kessler rode home that night with a story. He was 14. He'd held a lamp for 2 hours and seen a man's foot, and his father asked him at breakfast where he'd been, and Petey Kessler, who could not hold a secret in a bucket, told the whole store. He told it 4 times. By Wednesday, he'd told it 11. And Red Valley, which had decided in 2 hours in September that Amelia Hart was nothing, sat there and listened to a 14-year-old boy describe a woman who had not slept in 55 hours, who had a rope tied from a porch post to a barn door, who had 4 lamps burning in an east window, and had dragged a man across a floor by his collar and left her own blood on it. And she never cried, Petey said. Not one time. Doc said the foot was saved and she just sat down. That's all she done. She just sat down. Nobody said anything in that store for a while. Then Dutch Corliss said, "Well, hell." Elias came all the way back on the 20th. He'd been surfacing and going under for 3 days, and on the morning of the 20th, Amelia was at the table and heard him say from the bed perfectly clear, "There's 2 chairs." She was across that room before she'd decided to be. "Elias." "I can see him from here." His voice was a wreck. His eyes were clear. 2 chairs. So I ain't dead." "You're not dead." "How much of me is there?" "All of it," Amelia said, and her voice went. "All of it, Elias. You'll lose 3 toes, and Harlan says you'll limp in the cold, and you're going to be an insufferable old man about the weather, and everybody will have to hear about it. And all of it, every bit you've got all of it." Elias Carter lay there. Amelia: "Yes." "Did I get the 9 head?" And she laughed, and it turned into something else immediately, and she put her forehead down on his chest and stayed there, and he got his hand up into her hair, which cost him about everything he had, and neither one of them said anything for a long time. "You got 7, she said finally. 7. 7. They came down behind you in the dark, and Harlan found them in the corral, and I didn't even know they were there, Elias. I didn't look at the corral for 2 days. I didn't care. There were 7 cows in the yard, and I would have shot every one of them myself. 7's about 150. Elias." "That's the 28, he said 5 times over. And Amelia Hart lifted her head and looked at that man and said, "You went out there for me." Elias Carter didn't answer. "You went out into a blizzard," she said, "because I said a word in this kitchen and you couldn't say one back. Don't lie to me. I've had 55 hours to think about it, and I've got it figured, and if you lie to me now, I will never forgive you." He looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Elias, I've had 2 women in this house," Elias Carter said, "and I never told the first one anything, and she died, and I have spent 9 years understanding that the not saying is a choice a man makes, and he makes it every single day, and he tells himself it's just how he is. And last night he stopped. 2 nights ago. 5. He closed his eyes. 5 nights ago, you put your hands on my face and I stood there like a stump. And I lay awake and I thought she's going to leave. Not for the money. She's going to leave because she'll finally get tired of getting nothing back. And I couldn't say it, so I thought I'll do it. I'll go get the 9-head and clear the note and she'll see. See what? That she's worth going out in it, Elias said. Amelia Hart put both hands over her mouth. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, she said through her fingers. Yes, ma'am. That is the stupidest, Elias. I don't want a man who'll die for me. Do you understand? Any fool can die. Dying is easy. I've watched it. It takes about 4 minutes. Amelia. I want a man who'll stay. I want a man at a table. I want... Amelia. What? I know that now, Elias Carter said. And that was the whole of it. 4 words. And Amelia Hart, who had not cried in front of him in 9 weeks, except once in a loft with a booty in her hand, put her face down on that bed and wept like a child. And Elias Carter lay there with 3 toes gone and $1,100 due in 24 days, and his hand in her hair, and he was for the first time since 1875, completely and perfectly happy. Ellen Marsh came on the 24th. She came alone in a hired rig, and she had been crying so long her face had a permanent shape to it, and she stood in that doorway and said, "My father knows." Knows what? That I have the letter. Amelia's hand went to the frame. He didn't ask, Ellen said. That's not how he does it. He came into my room on Saturday and he sat down and he said, Ellen, I've had the accounts of this family in my head for 30 years, and I want you to know I have never once been surprised. And then he said, you'll want to think carefully about what happens to a man who lends money in a town where the bank's daughter is a sentimentalist. He threatened you. He loves me, Ellen said, and it came out like a scream that had been strangled. That's what nobody understands. He isn't cruel. He came in and kissed my forehead and said goodnight. He loves me, Miss Hart, and he will bankrupt 11 families and never lose a minute's sleep. And both of those things are true, and I have been living inside them for 19 years. Ellen. I'm marrying him, Ellen Marsh said. December 14th. Amelia went cold. The 14th. Yes, Ellen the 14th. He moved it, Ellen said, 2 weeks ago, from the 22nd. And Amelia Hart put her back against the doorframe and started to laugh horribly, because of course he had. Of course. The note came due on the 14th. The wedding was on the 14th. Half the valley would be in that church in their good coats on the exact same day that Elias Carter had to walk into an empty bank with $1,140.11. He hadn't just called the note. He'd called it on the one day in the year when nobody in Red Valley would be looking. He's very good, Amelia said. He's the best there is, Ellen said. Miss Hart, take the letter. No. Take it. The girl was shaking. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I stood in my room last night with it in my hand over a candle for 10 minutes, and I couldn't do it, and I couldn't keep it, and I have to give it to somebody. Ellen? Amelia took her by both shoulders. Listen to me. If you hand me that letter today in this doorway, then in 30 years you'll be a woman who handed a letter to somebody. Do you understand? You'll have done a brave thing at a safe moment. That's not the same. That's not the same thing at all, and you'll know it, and it will eat you for 50 years. Then what am I supposed to do? You already know, Amelia said. I don't. You're going to be standing in a church on the 14th of December, Amelia said, in front of everybody, and a man is going to ask you a question, and you'll have about 4 seconds. That's when it counts. That's the only time it ever counts. Ellen Marsh stared at her. You want me to ruin my own wedding? No, Amelia said. God, Ellen, no. I want you to do whatever you can live with. I'm the last woman on this earth who gets to tell a girl what to do about a wedding. I've got no advice. I've got a ruined name and a man with 3 toes and 20 days. Ellen's mouth trembled. I'll pray for you, she said. Don't, Amelia said. Pray for yourself, honey. I've got mine covered. I made a deal. Elias got up on the 1st of December. He got up because she went out to the barn, and he could hear her out there for 2 hours with the axe splitting wood. He should have split in October, and Elias Carter lay in that bed and listened to the woman he loved doing his work in the cold, with her hands still cracked from the rope, and at some point a man simply cannot do it anymore. She came in, and he was standing on one crutch made out of a broken rake. Elias Carter. Don't start. You get back in that. Amelia, if I lay in that bed one more day, I'm going to die of it, he said. Not the leg, the bed. I've been in it 15 days, and I've had nothing to do but think, and I'm not built for it, ma'am. I've got a small head, and it's full. You'll ruin the foot. Harlan says I can stand on the heel. Harlan says, Amelia. He looked at her. There's 13 days. She stopped. 13 days. Elias said, and there's 116 head in that draw, counting the 7 and a shoebox full of tickets on that shelf. And a man in Cheyenne named Dodson who owes me $912.22. And I can't ride. I can't sit a horse for 110 miles, and I won't be able to by the 14th, and both of us have known that for 2 weeks, and neither one of us has said it out loud. The room went quiet. So say it, Amelia said. You've got to go to Cheyenne, Elias said, alone, and get my money from a man who's been stealing it for 4 years. She left on the 3rd, with a shoebox, $200 sewn into the lining of a crooked blue coat, and a wall-eyed mare. She rode 9 miles to the coach road. Elias Carter got himself to the porch on a rake handle to watch her go, which cost him 3 days of healing, and he never regretted it. Amelia. She turned in the saddle. If it goes bad, Elias said, you come home anyway. Elias. I mean it. If he laughs at you. If he throws you out. If you come back with nothing but that box. He was gripping the post so hard his arm shook. You come home anyway. There'll be a fire, and there'll be 2 chairs, and I don't care about the rest of it. I never did. I only ever cared about it because it was all I had, and now it isn't. And Amelia Hart said, I'll be back on the 12th, and rode out and did not look back because if she'd looked back, she'd have stayed. She was back on the 12th. She got off that coach in Red Valley at 4 in the afternoon on Friday the 12th of December in front of about 30 people, and Petey Kessler saw her first and ran. She had a bank draft in her hand, $912.22 drawn on the Stockman's Bank of Cheyenne, payable to Elias Carter. And she had gotten it out of a man named Dodson in 90 minutes in a stockyard office in front of his own clerk. And here is how she did it, and she never told this to anybody either. She did not accuse him. She sat down with the shoebox and the tally book and said, Mr. Dodson, I've found an error in your clerk's arithmetic, and I've come 110 miles to give you the chance to fix it before I take it to the association. And Dodson looked at 4 years of his own weight tickets in a woman's handwriting, cross-footed and totaled, and understood in about 11 seconds that this was not a woman who would go away, and that the Wyoming Stock Growers Association met in January, and that $900 was cheaper than that. Miss, he said, writing, you'd have made a hell of a buyer. I'd have made a hell of a lot of things, Mr. Dodson, Amelia Hart said. Begin. She had $912.22. She had 200 sewn into her coat, 1,112.28 to find, and 2 days to find it in. And she stood on that street in Red Valley on the 12th of December and thought, I'll sell the trunk. And then Cora Mercer came out of the mercantile. The whole street stopped. Cora Mercer, who had stood in a parsonage doorway with her body in the gap and said, There's a train. Thursday came down that boardwalk in her good coat and stopped 4 feet from Amelia Hart, and everybody on that street stood there and watched, and nobody breathed. "Miss Hart?" "Mrs. Mercer." Cora Mercer opened her purse, and she took out money bills folded, and Amelia could see they'd been folded a long time. Folded and unfolded the way you do when you've been carrying a thing around deciding, and she held it out. "That's $40, she said. Amelia did not take it. "Mrs. Mercer, what is that?" "It's $40, Cora Mercer said. Her chin was up. Her voice was perfectly steady, and her hand was not. "It's my egg money. It's 11 years of it. Take it." "Why?" "Because the note's $11.40, and Harlan Pike says you're short." "That's not what I asked," Amelia said. "Mrs. Mercer, I asked you why." And there it was, right there on the boardwalk in front of 19 people. Cora Mercer's face came apart. "Because I've got a daughter in Ohio," she said. "And she hasn't written me in 6 years, and I have thought every single night since September about a woman standing in the street with nowhere to sleep, and how I—" Her voice broke badly in public in front of everybody. "How I stood in my own door and said there's a train Thursday, and my daughter's 26 years old in Ohio, and I don't know one soul who lives there, and every night I lie there, and I think, if somebody ever came to a door, Mrs. Mercer—" "Take the money," Cora Mercer said. Amelia Hart looked at that hand for a long time. "No," she said gently. "Miss Hart." "No, honey." And Amelia Hart did a thing that half of Red Valley talked about for 30 years. She closed Cora Mercer's fingers over that money with both her hands, the way she'd taken Ellen Marsh's hand off a wagon wheel, and she said, "You put that in an envelope and you send it to Ohio." Cora Mercer made a sound. "Send it to Ohio," Amelia said. "Send it with a letter that says I was wrong, that's all. 4 words. It doesn't have to be a good letter, it just has to go. And if she doesn't write back, send another one. And another one." She let go. "I don't want your $40, Mrs. Mercer. I'm the wrong person. I'm not the one you did it to. You are the one I did it to." "No," Amelia said. "I'm just the one who was standing there." All. Dutch Corliss found her at the wagon. He was a big man, 30 pounds of it in his belly, and he had not been able to look anybody in the eye in that store since November, and he came up with his hat in his hands like a boy at a door. "Ma'am." "Mr. Corliss." He stood there. "I said a thing," he said. "I know what you said." "About Elias, in the store." Dutch Corliss's ears had gone crimson. "About how he'd bought himself something warm for the winter." "Yes, I never met you," Dutch said. "That's the ma'am I want to say it plain. I never met you one time. I said that about a woman I'd never laid eyes on, and 11 men laughed, and I went home and ate my supper and slept like a baby." Amelia waited. "Petey Kessler told about the rope," Dutch said. "In the store, about the rope on the barn." "Mr. Corliss, I got a wife," Dutch Corliss said. His voice went. "I got a wife and she's been sick 2 years, and I sat there and listened to that boy talk about a woman what tied a rope from a porch to a barn so a man could find his way home, and I thought about how I'd talk about my wife if she was—" He stopped. He wiped his face with his hat. "I ain't got the words." "Nobody in this valley does," Amelia said. "It's an epidemic." Dutch Corliss laughed. It was a wet, awful, honest sound. Then he put something in the wagon bed. It was a calf. A yearling heifer hobbled, breathing hard. "Mr. Corliss." "That's $28, Dutch said. Amelia Hart could not speak. "She's a good one," Dutch said, and put his hat back on. "Tell Elias I said the follow-through's the thing. He'll know what it means. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him hell, ma'am, don't tell him nothing. He never listened to me anyhow." And he walked off down that boardwalk fast the way a man does. She got home at 9 that night with $1,140. She counted it 3 times on the kitchen table, and Elias Carter watched her do it, standing on a rake handle. and when she finished the third count, she said, $1,140.11. The 11 cents, Elias said. I have the 11 cents, Elias. I have the 11 cents, it's in my shoe. And then she couldn't finish, and he got the rake handle out from under himself and just fell into her, and the two of them went down onto that kitchen floor in a heap, and she was laughing, and he was saying, ow, and she was crying, and the money went everywhere all over the floor, 113 days of a woman's whole life scattered across the boards of a cabin in Wyoming territory. Sunday, she said into his shoulder. The 14th. The bank opens at 9. So does the church, Elias said. Amelia stopped. She sat up. Elias? Yeah. The bank won't be open. The fire ticked. It's a Sunday, Amelia Hart said slowly. Elias, it's a Sunday. Banks don't open on Sunday. He made the note due on a Sunday. Elias Carter went gray. He can refuse the payment, Amelia said. She was on her feet. He can, Elias? He can just not be there. He can be in a church at 9 o'clock in the morning, marrying his daughter to Josiah Bell, with half this valley in the pews, and the bank doors locked, and at 1 minute past midnight, that note is in default. And he takes the house and every cow, and there is not one thing in the law that says a man has to open his own bank on the Lord's day. Then we pay him Monday. There is no Monday, Amelia said. That's the whole point. That's the whole point, Elias. He didn't move the wedding to the 14th for the wedding. The silence in that kitchen was the loudest thing in the territory. He moved it, Amelia Hart said, so the note would fall on a Sunday. She did not sleep. She sat at that table all night with $1,140 in front of her, and a man on a rake handle across the room who wouldn't go to bed either. And at 4 in the morning on the 13th of December, she said out loud to nobody, "Then I'll pay him in the church." Elias Carter said, "What? Legal tender?" Amelia said. Elias, legal tender offered to the holder of the note in front of witnesses before midnight on the 14th. It doesn't have to be a bank. It has to be him. It has to be his hand and my hand and people watching. Amelia, he'll be standing at the front of a church, she said, at 9 o'clock in the morning in his good coat, giving his daughter away with 140 people looking at him. Every soul in this valley, Mrs. Lyle, Cora Mercer, Reverend Mercer, Harlan Pike, Dutch Corliss, Kessler and his boy. Mr. Fong won't be there, but everyone else on God's earth will be. Elias Carter's mouth had gone dry. You're going to walk into Ellen Marsh's wedding, he said. Yes. In front of everybody. Yes. The town that threw you in the mud. Yes, Amelia Hart said. Amelia, I know what they'll do. He'll be ready for you. Yes, she said. He will. He's been ready for me since September. He's the best there is. He told me so himself, and he wasn't bragging. And Elias, that's fine. Let him be ready. Let him have his lawyer and his clerk and his church and 140 people who already know exactly what I am. She stood up. Because there is one thing that man cannot do, Amelia Hart said. He can call a note on a Wednesday and smile at me on a Friday, and move a wedding to a Sunday, and never lose a minute's sleep. But he cannot stand at the front of a church on his daughter's wedding day in front of this entire valley and refuse $1,140.11 from a woman's hand. He might. Then let him, she said, and her eyes were shining and terrible. Let him do it out loud, in his own voice, where people are looking at him. And Elias Carter, 38 years old, 3 toes gone standing on a broken rake in his own kitchen, started to laugh. That's the barrels, he said. That's the barrels, Amelia Hart said. She wore the gray dress. She had thought about the blue coat, and she wore it crooked sleeve and all over the plain gray dress, and she pinned her hair up with her hands, shaking so bad it took 20 minutes, and Elias Carter got himself into a wagon with 2 crutches. Harlan Pike had made him, and a leg he was not supposed to be using, and drove 11 miles on the 14th of December, 1884. and they got to that church at 9 minutes past 9. The singing had already started. Amelia Hart sat in that wagon with $1,140.11 in a leather pouch against her chest, listening to a hymn come out through the walls of a building she had been turned away from in September, and she could not move. Amelia, I can't. Amelia, Elias, I can't. Her teeth were going. I can't. I'm going to walk in there and 140 people are going to turn around. And I know exactly what that feels like. I know what it feels like. I did it in the mud in September, and I have not been the same person since. Elias Carter reached over and took her hand. 2 chairs, he said. Amelia Hart closed her eyes. Say the rest, she said. There's 2 chairs in that house, Elias said, and there'll be 2 chairs in it tonight if he takes every stick of the rest, because I'll build 'em again out of the barn door if I have to. And ma'am, I have been the loneliest man in this valley for 9 years, and everybody knew it, and not one of 'em ever came out that road except Harlan, and you came out of a field. His voice cracked all the way for the first time in 9 years. You came out of a field, and you tied a rope from my porch to my barn. And I don't have the words, and I never will, but I'm going to go in there on 2 sticks with a foot that don't work, and I'm going to stand where they can see me. And if you can't walk in that door, then we'll go home right now, and I'll never say another thing about it as long as I live. Amelia Hart opened her eyes. She got down off that wagon. She walked around it, and she got under Elias Carter's arm and helped him down, and the 2 of them went up the steps of that church together at 11 minutes past 9, and Amelia Hart put her hand on the door of the only building in Red Valley that had ever been shut in her face and pushed it open. The singing stopped. 141 people turned around, and Marcus Marsh, standing at the front with his daughter on his arm, looked down that aisle at the woman he'd offered $2,000 to disappear and smiled at her warm and courteous, the way he'd smiled across a table in November. Miss Hart, he said pleasantly. You're late. I'm not late, Amelia Hart said. The note's due today. It's today. 141 people did not move. She had genuinely thought sitting in that wagon that the worst thing would be the turning around. It wasn't. The worst thing was that nobody turned back. They just stayed that way. Every face in that church stayed pointed at her like she was weather. Miss Hart, Marcus Marsh said, warm as a stove. This is my daughter's wedding. Yes, sir? You've come into a church. Yes, sir. I've been trying to for 4 months. Somebody in the 3rd row made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It got strangled fast. Reverend Farsh? Marsh said, not even turning his head, I believe you have a service. And Reverend Mercer, 64 years old in his good vestments, holding a book with his thumb in it, opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Amelia watched that man's face and understood everything about him in a second and a half. He wasn't cruel. He had never been cruel. He was a man who had spent 40 years finding the sentence that would get him out of the room with the fewest people angry at him, and for the first time in his life he had run out of sentences. Marcus, he said finally, the lady said she has business. On a Sunday. Well, the Reverend said, and stopped and looked at the ceiling of his own church like it might have something written on it. Cora Mercer stood up. She was in the 2nd pew. She stood up in her good coat with her purse in both hands, and she did not say one word. She just stood in front of 140 people at her own church on the wrong side, and she stood there like a fence post and looked at her husband. The Reverend Mercer looked back at his wife of 38 years. Let her speak, Marcus, he said. Amelia got about 4 steps up that aisle before she understood she wasn't going to make it alone. It wasn't the eyes. She could take the eyes. It was Mrs. Lyle in the 4th pew who had told her we're full with 4 keys hanging on the board, and who now would not look up from her hymnal, and it was the fact that Amelia's legs had simply stopped being hers. Then Elias Carter came through the door behind her on 2 crutches. The sound of it. That was the thing nobody in that valley ever forgot. Not a word. Not a speech. The sound of a man on 2 sticks putting himself up a church aisle with a foot that didn't work. and a leg he'd been told 40 times not to stand on one step. Drag, one-step drag, and every single person in that building knew exactly why he was on those sticks, because a 14-year-old boy named Petey Kessler could not hold a secret in a bucket. Elias didn't look at anybody. He got up beside her and stopped and stood there breathing hard, and he did not say one word. He'd promised her that in a yard in November with a hammer stuck in a barn wall, and he kept it, and it was costing him everything he had. "Mr. Carter," Marsh said, "sit down before you fall down." "No, sir. You've made your point." "I ain't made a point," Elias said. "I'm just standing here. She'll do the talking." And that was it. That was all he said, and he said it to the man not for her, and Amelia Hart felt something come up under her ribs like a hand. She walked the rest of the aisle. Dead. She stopped 6 feet from Marcus Marsh and took the pouch out of her coat. $1,140, she said. And 11 cents. The church made a noise. "In legal tender," Amelia said, "offered in full satisfaction of the note of Elias Carter on the 14th of December, 1884, in front of 140 witnesses. Take it, Mr. Marsh." Marcus Marsh looked at that pouch. And here is what she had gotten wrong, and she knew it the instant she saw his face, and it was the only thing. In 4 months she had not thought through. He wasn't afraid. He was pleased. "Miss Hart," Marcus Marsh said gently, "I can't take that. It's legal tender. It's not that." He was almost kind about it. That was the horror. "I'd take it. I'd take it right here in front of God and Cora Mercer and count it on the altar rail if I could, and you'd have your moment and I'd go home. But I can't take it, ma'am, because I don't hold the note." The floor went out from under her. "You hold the note," Amelia said. "I did." "You wrote the demand." "I did," Marsh said. "On Wednesday, and on Thursday morning I assigned it." He turned his head unhurried and looked at the young man standing at the front of the church in a new coat. "It's a wedding present," Marcus Marsh said, "for my son-in-law." Amelia Hart stood in the aisle of that church and did not breathe for 4 full seconds. She had ridden 110 miles. She had sat across from a stockyard buyer with a shoebox. She had counted $1,140 3 times on a kitchen table and put 11 cents in her shoe, and she had walked into the one building in Red Valley that had ever been shut in her face. And the whole thing had been aimed at a man who had already handed the gun to somebody else. Behind her, Elias Carter said very quietly, "God Almighty." "Now don't be dramatic," Marsh said to the church. "It's a common enough thing. A father wants to start a young man with something in his hand. Land's better than cash." He said it easy, comfortable, a man explaining crop rotation. "The Carter place is a good section. The East End waters year-round. Josiah's never run cattle, but he'll learn or he'll lease it, and either way, he'll have something of his own to bring to my daughter's household, which is more than he had on Wednesday." "You gave him a man's house," Amelia said. "I gave him a note," Marsh said. "Miss Hart, you keep making the same error, and it's beneath you by now. Nobody in this room has done anything to Elias Carter. He borrowed $1,100 in 1881 and signed a paper with a demand clause on page 2, and I would have carried him till March and been glad to, because he's never missed a payment in his life." "Then why?" "Because you wouldn't take $2,000, Marcus Marsh said. The church went absolutely silent. And Amelia understood that he had just done it. Right there, in front of everybody. He'd said the whole thing out loud in his own voice, and it hadn't cost him one thing, because he'd said it the way a man reads a weather report, and half that room heard it and thought, well, that's business. That's what she was up against. Not a villain. An accountant. "Say that again," Amelia said. "I'd rather not repeat myself." "Say it again, Mr. Marsh." "I offered you $2,000, Marsh said, patient as a schoolmaster, "to take a coach to Denver, and you refused. And so I had a problem that money couldn't solve, which in my experience is the only kind there is. So I converted it. I turned a woman I couldn't move into a man I could." He nodded, almost apologetic. "It's not personal, Miss Hart. I've told you that twice now and you won't hear it. Mr. Marsh, Amelia Hart said, nothing in your life is personal, and that is the single saddest thing I have ever heard a man say about himself in a church. Marcus Marsh's face did not move, but his jaw did. One time, about 1/8 of an inch, and Amelia Hart saw it and thought there. She turned around. Josiah Bell was standing 5 feet behind her in his new coat, with his hair combed, and he had gone the color of a wet sheet, the exact same color he'd gone in a bank in November when she'd told him he couldn't spell believe. Josiah. Miss Hart, you hold the note. It's a gift, it's not. You hold the note, Amelia said, and held up the pouch. So take the money. And there it was. 141 people watched a woman hold $1,140 up in the air in a church, and watched a man in a new coat look at it, and Josiah Bell's mouth opened, and nothing came out, and every single person in that room understood all at once in the same half-second exactly what they were looking at. Take the money, Josiah, Amelia said. I can't just... It's your note. It's your money. It's the whole amount, and it's 11 cents over, and I've got it right here. She took one step. Take it. There's procedures. There's your hand, Amelia said. That's the procedure. Put your hand out. Miss Hart, this is my wedding day. Put your hand out, Josiah. And Josiah Bell, 32 years old, standing at an altar, 8 minutes from being a rich man, looked past her at his father-in-law. The whole church saw him do it. That was the moment. Not anything Amelia said. Not anything Elias did. 140 people in their good coats watched a bridegroom look at another man to find out whether he was allowed to take money that belonged to him and Red Valley, which had needed 2 hours in September to decide that Amelia Hart was nothing, needed about 1 second to decide something else. Dutch Corliss said from the back in a voice like a dropped anvil, "Take the money, Josiah." "Mr. Corliss," Marsh said. "Sit down." "I'm sittin'," Dutch said. "I'm sittin' right here. I just wanted him to hear it from a fella he ain't scared of." Somebody laughed. 2 somebodies. Kessler stood up. He didn't say anything. He was a storekeeper, and he owed money at that bank like everybody else, and he stood up anyway in the 6th row and put his hand on his boy's shoulder. Then Harlan Pike stood up. He got up slow, 61 years old, and he took his hat off, and Amelia Hart looked at that man standing there and thought about a kitchen table in November and a man with his face in his hands saying, "I did nothing for 11 weeks because Marcus Marsh holds the note on my house." "Harlan," Marsh said, "don't." "Marcus." Harlan Pike said, "You take my house." "Harlan." "You take it," Harlan said. "It's $400, and it's got a bad roof, and I'm 61 years old, and you're welcome to it. And then I want you to go find another doctor in this territory that'll ride out to a homestead at 2 in the morning in February for a woman that ain't got a dime." He put his hat back on. "I'll wait." Marcus Marsh said nothing. "That's what I figured." Harlan Pike said. And still, it was not enough. That's the part nobody likes. Everybody wants it to be enough. Right there. The doctor stands up, the storekeeper stands up, the fat man hollers from the back, and the wicked banker crumbles. Marcus Marsh did not crumble. He didn't even blink. "This is very moving," he said. "Josiah, take the pouch." Josiah Bell's head came up. "Sir." "Take the pouch," Marsh said, and for the first time there was a small flat edge in his voice. "And hand it to Tewksbury, and Tewksbury will hold it in escrow, pending an accounting of the principal, the interest to date the fees of assignment, and the costs of demand. And if it's short by 1 dime, the tender fails, and we'll all go back to what we were doing." Amelia Hart's blood stopped. "There aren't any fees," she said. "There are always fees," Marsh said. Page 2 says. "Page 2 says the balance and all costs incident thereto," Marcus Marsh said. "Miss Hart, you read a ledger better than any clerk I've ever employed, and I mean that sincerely. But you're not a lawyer, and the phrase cost incident there too is 4 words long, and it will eat you alive. And by Tuesday, I will have a bill in front of you with a recording fee and a demand fee, and Mr. Tewksbury's time at $9 an hour, and it will come to $1,161, and you will be $21 short and out of days." Nobody in that church breathed. "That's it," Amelia said. "That's the whole trick." "That's the whole trick," Marsh agreed. "It always is. It's never grand. Nobody's ever tied a widow to a railroad track, ma'am. They just add $9 an hour." Amelia Hart stood in that aisle with $1,140 in her hand and felt the last 4 months go out of her like water out of a bucket. And she started to laugh. Not a good laugh. Marsh's eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch. "You want to know the funny thing," Amelia said. "I've got $21. "I beg your pardon?" "I've got $21, she said, "and I've got 40, and I've got a heifer worth 28, and I've got $912 out of a thief in Cheyenne who thought a woman couldn't crossfoot a column, and Mr. Marsh, do you know why I know I've got it? Because Cora Mercer tried to hand me her egg money on a boardwalk on Friday, and I said no." Cora Mercer, still standing, made a sound into her glove. "I said no," Amelia said, "because I'm proud, and being proud is the one luxury I have ever been able to afford. So go on, send me your bill on Tuesday. Add your $9 an hour. Add $20 an hour. I'll be in this valley on Tuesday, Mr. Marsh, and on Wednesday, and in January, and I will pay every dime of it in pennies if I have to, and you will still be a man who did this at his daughter's wedding." "Miss Hart." "Because they'll have watched you do it," Amelia said, and her voice went up and filled that whole building. "That's the only thing you've got that costs you anything, and you know it. You told me in November there was nothing personal in that room. You were right. There's nothing personal in you at all. But there's 140 people in this church, and every one of them owes you money, and every one of them just watched you tell a bridegroom he couldn't take a payment on his own note, and Mr. Marsh, on Monday morning, those people are going to come into your bank." Marcus Marsh looked at her. And for the first time in 4 months, for the first time in 19 years, for the first time possibly in his life, Marcus Marsh did arithmetic in public and did not like the answer. "Huck." "Papa." The whole church turned. Ellen Marsh was 19 years old, in a white dress her mother had ordered from Chicago, standing at the front of that building, with her hand still through her father's arm. She had not made a sound in 11 minutes. "Ellen, sweetheart, sit." "Papa, take the money," Ellen Marsh said. "Ellen." "Take the money." "Ellen, this is not the—" "I have it," Ellen said. And she reached into the front of her dress and pulled out a letter. Amelia Hart's whole body went cold. "Don't," she said. "Ellen, honey, don't." 6 pages, Ellen Marsh said. She was not talking to Amelia. She was not talking to her father. She was talking in a voice that was breaking in half to 140 people in their good coats. 6 pages in a cramped hand because the paper was expensive. About a little girl named Ruth who was 4 years old and died of scarlet fever in April of 1881, holding her aunt's hand. Somebody in the pews said, "Oh, Lord." "He read it out loud in my parlor," Ellen said in September, "to my mother and me, to show us what kind of woman she was." "Ellen," Josiah started. "He did a voice," Ellen Marsh said. The sound that came out of that church was not a gasp. It was lower than that. It was the sound 140 people make when they find out they have been on the wrong side of something for 4 months. "He did a little voice," Ellen said, "for the part where she wrote about holding her hand, and my mother laughed, and I sat there in my good chair, and I laughed too. I laughed. I want everybody to hear that I laughed, and then I went upstairs and I was sick in a basin, and I have not slept a whole night since the 22nd of September." "Ellen Marsh," her father said, "give me that letter." "No, sir." "Give me that letter." "No, sir," Ellen said, and she was crying so hard she could barely form the words, and she formed them anyway. "Because it isn't yours, and it isn't mine, and it isn't his, and that's the entire thing that's wrong with all of you. It's hers. It was hers the whole time." And she walked down out of that altar in a Chicago dress, and put 6 pages of paper into Amelia Hart's hand. Amelia looked down at her own handwriting. 11 days on a train, a cramped hand because the paper was expensive. He told me he'd lost people too, and I thought I had found one honest man in this world. She did not cry. She had not cried in that town in September, and she did not cry in that church in December. And later she said it wasn't strength, it was that there simply wasn't anything left in the well. "Ellen," she said. "I'm sorry, Ellen." Amelia took her by both shoulders, the way she had in a doorway in November. "Look at me." Not at him. At me. The girl looked. "You had 4 seconds. Do you remember I told you you'd have 4 seconds?" "Yes." "You used them," Amelia Hart said. Ellen Marsh made a sound like a child. "You used them," Amelia said in front of everybody on the worst possible day at the highest possible cost, which is the only time it counts. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what it is, honey. And you did it, and nobody can ever take that off you as long as you live. And Ellen Marsh, 19 in her wedding dress in front of the entire valley, put her face into the shoulder of a woman she had met twice, and Amelia Hart held her. "Ellen." Josiah Bell's voice had gone somewhere ugly. "Ellen, come here." Ellen didn't move. "Ellen, get away from that woman." And Ellen Marsh lifted her head and said to her fiancé in front of 140 people in a perfectly clear voice, "Believe." Josiah blinked. "What?" "Spell it," Ellen said. "Ellen." "Spell believe, Josiah." "This is wool, spell it." And Josiah Bell stood at his own altar and could not spell a word. The laugh that went through that church was the cruelest sound Amelia Hart ever heard in her life, and she did not enjoy 1 second of it, and she would have stopped it if she could, because she knew exactly what it felt like to be the thing 40 people decided about in an afternoon. She actually said, "Don't." Nobody heard her. That's the thing about a town. It only ever moves in one direction, and it never once asks you whether you wanted it to. Reverend Marcus Marsh said, "Proceed." The church stopped laughing. "Marcus," Reverend Mercer said, "proceed." And there it was, the first crack in 19 years, 1 word louder than it should have been, and every soul in that building heard it. "My daughter is upset. Brides are upset. Read the service." "Papa," Ellen said. "Ellen Louise, take your place." "Papa, I'm not going to marry him." "You are." "Papa, you are." Marcus Marsh said, "Because it is arranged, and because I have spent 30 years building something that has to go somewhere, and because you are 19, and you do not get to set fire to it in a church over a letter." "It's not the letter," Ellen Marsh said. And she said the thing that broke him. "It's that you weren't surprised," she said. Marcus Marsh went white. "You came into my room on Saturday," Ellen said, "and you sat on my bed, and you said, 'Ellen, I've had the accounts of this family in my head for 30 years, and I have never once been surprised.' And you kissed my forehead, and you said good night." Her voice was destroying itself. "Papa, do you know what I did after you left? I sat up until 4 in the morning trying to remember one single time in 19 years that I have surprised you. 1. And I couldn't, because I never have. Because you built me the same way you built the bank. Ellen!" "Are you surprised now?" Ellen Marsh screamed. The church rang with it. And Marcus Marsh, 55 years old in his good coat at the front of a church holding his daughter's arm, did not answer, because he was. Nobody moved for maybe 5 seconds. Then Amelia Hart, who had every reason on God's earth to stand there and enjoy it, did the thing that half of Red Valley talked about for the next 40 years. She said, "Mr. Marsh, sit down." Marsh's head turned. "Sit down," Amelia said. "Reverend, is there a chair? Get the man a chair." "Miss Hart," Marsh said thinly, "I don't require. You're gray to the lips, and you've got a hand on that rail. Amelia said. "I've seen a man's color go that direction, and it took me 55 hours to fix it, and I'm not doing it twice this winter. Harlan. Harlan." Harlan Pike was already moving. "Miss Hart," Marcus Marsh said, and his voice did something. "Why are you doing that?" "Because you're a person," Amelia said. "That's all. That's the only reason there's ever been for anything. You've been telling me since November that there's nothing personal in this, and I've been telling you there's nothing else. And Mr. Marsh, this is what I meant, and I'm sorry it took me 4 months in a church to say it plain." Marcus Marsh sat down in a chair somebody brought from the vestry, and the whole valley watched him let a woman he'd tried to buy put her hand on his shoulder, while a doctor took his pulse. "Now," Amelia said, "Josiah, the note." You're not seriously—" "I'm seriously." She held up the pouch again. $1,140.11. Nothing's changed. It's still today. The note's still due. Take it. "There's fees." "Then quote them," Amelia said. "Out loud, right now, in front of everybody. You're the holder, Josiah. It's your note, so you tell this church what you're charging Elias Carter to hand you money he owes you." Josiah Bell stood there. "Say a number?" Amelia said. I'd have to consult." "Say a number, Josiah." "Tewksbury has the—" "You're the holder. Say a number." And Josiah Bell, with 140 faces on him, and his fiancée gone, and his father-in-law sitting in a chair with a doctor's hand on his wrist, said the truest sentence of his life, for the second time in 2 months, "I don't know what the fees are." "No," Amelia said. "You don't, because you never held a note in your life, because a man handed you one on Thursday like a coat, and you put it on, and you didn't even look in the pockets." She stepped forward. "So here's the whole of it," Amelia Hart said. "There aren't any fees. There's a principal and there's interest, and I've got both and 11 cents over. And you can stand there and tell this town you're going to hire a lawyer from Cheyenne at $9 an hour to keep a crippled man from paying you what he owes you. You can say that, Josiah, out loud in your own voice right here, where they can hear you, or you can put your hand out." The whole church waited. "Put your hand out, Josiah," Amelia said. And a voice from the back of that church said, "Josiah." It was Mrs. Lyle. She had not lifted her head off that hymnal in 20 minutes. She lifted it now, and she stood up in the 4th pew, a widow who had come into that valley with nothing but a name, who had looked at money on her own counter in September and said, "We're full," with 4 keys hanging on the board. "Josiah Bell," she said, "you take that woman's money." "Mrs. Lyle, I've known you since you were 6 years old," Mrs. Lyle said, and her voice cracked open right there in front of God and everybody. "You ate at my table twice a week for 9 years, and I stood behind my own counter in September and told a girl with mud on her dress that I was full, and I have lain awake every night since, and I did that. Josiah, don't you look at me. I did it. It's mine. I own it. But you're the one that put her in the street." She was shaking. "So you take that money. You take it right now. Because I am 68 years old, and I would like to sleep." The church did not make a sound. Josiah Bell looked around that room for help. 11 grown men looked at their boots, same as the store, same as always. Except this time, they weren't hiding from Elias Carter. They were hiding from him. He put his hand out. That was it. After everything. He put his hand out, and Amelia Hart put a leather pouch into it, and there was no music and no thunder, and nobody cheered. "Count it," she said. "I don't need—" "Count it," Amelia said. Out loud, every dollar. "I have been called a liar in this valley for 4 months, and I am not going to be called one on Tuesday." And so Josiah Bell stood at the altar of the Red Valley Church on his wedding day and counted $1,140 out loud in front of 141 people. And it took him 9 minutes, and it was the longest 9 minutes in the history of that town. At the end of it, he said, 1,140. And Josiah Bell looked in the bottom of the pouch. "And 11 cents, he said. "Say the whole thing. Miss Hart, say the whole thing, Josiah." $1,140.11. Josiah Bell said, in full satisfaction of the note of Elias Carter. And then, because he was who he was, he added quietly, it was in her shoe. Amelia Hart turned around. Elias Carter was standing in the middle of that aisle on two crutches with his hat in his teeth, because he had no hands, and he had not said one word in 22 minutes, and he was shaking from the waist down from standing that long on a foot with 3 toes gone. She walked down that aisle. She got about halfway, and Cora Mercer said, Miss Hart. Amelia stopped. Miss Hart, I want to say it here, Cora Mercer said. Not on a boardwalk. Here, where I did it. Mrs. Mercer, you don't. I stood in my own door, Cora Mercer said to the whole church, with my body in the gap so she couldn't get past me, and I said there's a train Thursday, and I said it twice in the same voice so she'd know I meant go away, at the parsonage of a church. Her chin was up and her face was in ruins. And she came to my door on Friday, and I tried to give her $40 to make it stop hurting me, and she wouldn't take it. And do you know what she said? She told me to send it to my daughter in Ohio. Somebody 2 rows back started to cry. So I did, Cora Mercer said. Thursday. It's gone. It's on the coach. It says I was wrong and it's not a good letter, and it went. She sat down. The Reverend Mercer looked at his wife for a long moment, and then he did a thing that nobody in that valley had ever seen him do. In 40 years, he set his book down on the altar and went and sat next to her and took her hand. Amelia got the rest of the way down the aisle. Elias. He took the hat out of his teeth. You didn't say one word, she said. No, ma'am. 22 minutes. 23, Elias Carter said. There was a bad stretch in the middle. And Amelia Hart laughed right there in the aisle and put her forehead on his chest, and 140 people watched. You told me not to, Elias said into her hair. In the yard, with the hammer. You said if I ever spoke for you again, you said being defended by a man is how a woman finds out she ain't allowed to talk. And ma'am, I want you to know it near killed me, every second. There was a minute there I was going to hit that boy with a crutch. I know. I mean, I had the crutch up, Elias said. Elias. But I didn't, he said. Because you were right. You said you wanted their silence, not my word. And I have stood here 23 minutes and listened to this whole town be quiet while you talked. And Amelia, his voice went all the way in front of everybody. I never in my life heard anything so loud. They were 4 feet from the door when Marcus Marsh said, Miss Hart. She stopped. He was still in the chair. Harlan Pike still had 2 fingers on his wrist. He looked 65 instead of 55, and his hand was not steady, and everybody in that church could see it. You never named the 3rd thing, he said. The church went quiet again. In November, Marsh said. In my bank. You said there were 3 things and you only named 2 and you've had 4 months. And today you had me in a chair in front of my entire valley with a doctor on my pulse, and you still didn't name it. He looked up. So name it. I'm asking. I don't ask Miss Hart. I want you to understand what that costs me. I'm asking. Amelia Hart stood there a long moment. It doesn't apply anymore, she said. Name it anyway. Mr. Marsh. Name it, Marcus Marsh said, and Amelia Hart said, I was going to ask you to let her go. Marsh's face did not move. That was the 3rd thing, Amelia said. In November, in your bank. I was going to look at you across that table with your $2,000 on it and ask you to let your daughter out of an engagement to a man she'd already found out about. That's all. That was it. That was the thing I was saving. Why didn't you? Because Elias shook his head at me, Amelia said, and I lost my nerve. And I have thought about it every day since, and I've been ashamed of it every day since because it was the only thing in that whole room that was worth anything. Marcus Marsh sat in that chair. She'd have been free in November, he said. Yes, sir. 2 months ago. Yes, sir. And you'd have had nothing, Marsh said. You'd have spent your one ask on a girl you'd never met and walked out of my bank with no money and no name and a note called on the man who took you in." "Yes, sir," Amelia said. And Marcus Marsh put his face in his hands. 55 years old, in a church, in front of 140 people who owed him money. "Get out," he said. "Mr. Marsh." "Get out," Marcus Marsh said, and it wasn't rage. It was something much worse. "Because I have been in a room with you 3 times in my life, and every single time I have found out something about myself that I have spent 30 years arranging not to know, and I am too old, ma'am. I am far too old, and if you say one more true thing to me in front of these people, I will not survive it." Harlan Pike said quietly, "Marcus." "Don't," Marsh said. "Don't you say my name kindly, Harlan. 20 years you've hated my guts, don't you dare go soft. Now I couldn't stand it." And Harlan Pike said, "You held my note 11 weeks and never called it, in November, when I told you I'd been out to Carter's." Marsh's head came up. "You knew," Harlan said. "You knew I'd been out there, and you knew I believed her, and you never said one word to me about my $400, not once." "That was an oversight." "That was not an oversight," Harlan Pike said. "Marcus, I've known you 30 years, and you have never had an oversight in your life." And Marcus Marsh, banker arithmetician the best there was, said nothing at all, and everybody in that church understood something about him that he had never once permitted himself to be accused of. They got out the door. They got all the way to the wagon, and Elias had to sit down on the step right there because the leg was done, and there were people coming out of that church behind them, and Amelia turned around and braced herself for the thing she had braced for her whole life. Nobody said anything cruel. That's the whole ending, and it's not much, and it's everything. Nobody said anything cruel. Kessler's wife brought a chair out. Petey Kessler took the horses' heads without being asked. Dutch Corliss came out and stood about 8 feet away with his hat in his hands and could not make his mouth work at all, and finally said, "The heifer taking." "She's taking," Amelia said. "Well," Dutch said. "Good. That's good. That's well." And he stood there another second, and then said in a rush, like a man jumping off a roof, "Ma'am, my wife's been sick 2 years, and she can't get down the road, and she says, 'Would you come to supper?'" Amelia Hart stared at him. "She says you can bring him," Dutch said, "if he can be got in a wagon." "Mr. Corliss." "She says," Dutch Corliss said, "she's had 4 months of hearing about you, and she'd like to meet you her own self and decide. And that after everything. After the mud, and the bank, and the blizzard, and the church, that was the thing that finally did it." Amelia Hart stood in the road in Red Valley on the 14th of December, 1884, and cried. Not for long, maybe 11 seconds. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry about it, and said, "Tell her yes." Yeah, Ellen Marsh was married in April. Not to Josiah Bell. Josiah Bell was in Cheyenne by February and Denver by June, and nobody in Red Valley ever heard his name again, except as a thing you called a man who wouldn't stand up. Ellen married a horse trader from Laramie in 1887, which her father hated, and she did it anyway, and he came to the wedding. But that's ahead of things. Amelia Hart and Elias Carter were married on the 4th of May, 1885, in that same church, and there were 19 people in it. 19, not 140. That's the thing people always get wrong when they tell it they want the whole town in the pews weeping. It wasn't like that. Some of them never came around. Tewksbury went back to Cheyenne. Mrs. Lyle's boarding house had a bad year, and she blamed it on the wrong thing. There were people in that valley who went to their graves in 1910, still saying there'd been something funny about that Eastern woman. That's how towns work. That's exactly how it works. And anyone who tells you they all came around and wept in the aisle has never lived in one. But there were 19. Harlan Pike stood up with Elias and cried, and pretended he hadn't. Cora Mercer did the flowers, and there weren't any flowers in Wyoming on the 4th of May, so she did them out of paper, and they were terrible, and Amelia kept them in a box for the rest of her life. Dutch Corliss came with his wife in a wagon bed on a mattress, and Nora Corliss held Amelia's hand for a long time and said, "You come Thursdays." And Amelia came Thursdays for 2 years, until Nora died and was in the room when she did. Petey Kessler rang the bell. Mr. Fong came. He stood in the back in a good coat, and he did not sing the hymns because he did not know them. And afterward, Amelia went to him first before her own guests, and took both his hands and said, "You nodded at me." "Miss, on the 12th of November," Amelia Hart said, "on the street. Everybody in this valley had their eyes on their boots, and you looked right at me and nodded. And Mr. Fong, I was 11 weeks into being nobody, and it near put me on my knees. Mr. Fong said, I shut my door in September. You had 2 men watching you across the street. I still shut it." "Yes," Amelia said. "And then you nodded. And you're the only man in this valley who's ever admitted the first part to my face, and that's why you're standing in my church." God. Marcus Marsh did not come. He sent a clerk with a paper, and the clerk handed it to Elias Carter on the church step, and left without saying anything. And Elias read it standing up, and then handed it to his wife of 11 minutes without a word. It was the note. Marked, paid, stamped, dated the 14th of December, 1884, and released, and along the bottom in a banker's small hand, Miss Hart. The recording fee was $1.80. I have paid it. It is the only thing I have ever done in this valley that was not arithmetic, and I would be obliged if you would not tell anyone. Monsieur Marsh. Amelia Hart stood on the steps of that church in her gray dress, and laughed until she had to sit down. "What?" Elias said. "What?" "He asked me not to tell anyone," she said. So he wrote it down," Amelia said. "Elias, he wrote it down and signed it, and had a man hand it to us in public in front of 19 witnesses. That man has never made a clerical error in his life." Elias Carter looked at that paper for a long moment. "He wanted you to know," he said slowly. "He wanted somebody to know," Amelia said. "Once, before he dies, that's all. That's the whole of it, and it's $1.80, and he'll never say another word about it as long as he lives." She folded it and put it in her sleeve. "You know what the awful thing is?" she said. "What?" "I'd have liked him," Amelia Hart said. "In another life. If he'd been born poor. God help me, Elias. I sat across that table from him, and I have never in my life met anybody who could keep up with me for more than 4 minutes, and he did it for 40, and he enjoyed it, and so did I, and I will be sorry about that till the day I die." That evening, the 4th of May, 1885, at their own table, with 19 people gone home and the dishes done, Amelia Carter sat down and looked across at her husband. "Elias." "Say the thing." "What thing?" "You know what thing." And Elias Carter, 39 years old, 3 toes gone out of debt for the first time in 11 years, looked around a kitchen with paper flowers on the shelf, and a shoebox of weight tickets on the ledger, and a bar on the inside of a door that neither of them had ever taken down, and never would, and said, "There's 2 chairs in this house." "There's 4, Amelia said. "I made 2 more. "You made 2 more, she agreed. "For what?" Elias said. "There ain't but us." And Amelia Carter looked at her husband across a table in Wyoming territory and said, "Elias, honey, why do you suppose you made them?" And Elias. Carter opened his mouth to answer, and then he shut it and looked at those 2 empty chairs for a long, long time. And Amelia watched a man who had built a wall 9 stones high in 9 winters sit in his own kitchen and understand at 39 years old that he had already knocked it down himself in the dark with a saw and hadn't noticed. "Oh," Elias Carter said. "Don't," Amelia said. "I didn't say nothing." "You said, 'oh.'" "That ain't a word," Elias said. "That's a noise." "Elias Carter, you have made exactly 1 noise in 9 years, and I am not going to let you take it back." He sat there with his hands flat on the table, looking at 2 empty chairs like they'd walked in on their own and sat down. "I made 'em in March," he said finally. "I know when you made them. I made 'em in March, and I didn't know why, and I put 'em against the wall, and I ain't looked at 'em since, and Amelia," he stopped. "Ma'am, I'm 39. "I'm 32. That ain't— It is exactly what it is, Amelia said. Say the rest. I can't. Elias. I can't, he said, and it came out of him like something tearing. Amelia, the last time there was a small chair in this house, it went in a box, in a loft, with a pair of booties in it, and I put a saddle on top of that box for 9 years, so I wouldn't have to see the shape of it. And I made 2 chairs in March, like a man sleepwalking. And I have not said the word out loud one time, and I'm not going to say it tonight on the 4th of May at this table, because if I say it out loud, then it's a thing I want, and I have wanted exactly one thing in my life, and I got up at 4 in the morning and rode 19 miles for it, and it was dead when I got back. The kitchen went very quiet. Amelia Carter got up and came around that table and sat down in his lap, which she had never done, which no one had ever done, and took his face in both her hands. Elias, don't be kind to me right now. I'm not being kind. I'm being accurate. Her thumbs were on his cheekbones. Listen to me. I'm not going to promise you anything. I'm 32 and my mother died of it, and I have exactly no idea what this body will do. And any woman who tells you otherwise is lying to you or to herself. So I'm not promising. Then don't. But you made the chairs, Amelia said. Elias Carter's eyes closed. That's all I'm saying to you tonight, she said. You made them in March in the dark with a saw without knowing. That's not a promise. That's not arithmetic. Elias, honey, that's the first prayer you've said in 9 years, and you didn't even notice you were doing it. And Elias Carter put his forehead against his wife's collarbone and did not say one word for a long time. And Amelia sat in his lap in a kitchen in Wyoming Territory and let him not say it. She was sick in the middle of June. She said it was the eggs. Elias said the eggs were fine. She said the eggs were not fine, that she had been telling him about those hens since April, and she was sick again on Tuesday and again on Friday. And on the second Saturday, she came out of the pantry gray to the lips and had to hold the doorframe. Elias Carter went across that room on a bad foot, faster than he'd moved since the blizzard. Amelia, it's the eggs. Amelia, it's the eggs, she said, and her voice was the voice of a woman with her fingernails in a doorframe. And I would like you to say it's the eggs, Elias. I would like you to look me in the face and lie to me one single time in your whole life. Is that so much? I'll get Harlan. Don't you dare get Harlan. Amelia, if you get Harlan Pike, Amelia Carter said, then it's real. And if it's real, then I have to want it. And if I want it, then I have to be a woman who can lose it. And Elias, I have already been that woman. I held a 4-year-old girl in Baltimore, and I have been carrying her name around in my mouth for 4 years like a stone. And I cannot— She stopped. Elias Carter stood there. Say the rest, he said. And that was the moment, the exact moment, and neither one of them ever got over it, that Elias Carter used her own words on her in the same flat voice she'd used on him in a bank in November. And Amelia Hart Carter looked at her husband and understood that the man had been listening the entire time. I'm afraid, she said. Yes, ma'am. I'm so afraid I can't breathe. Yes, ma'am, Elias said. Me too. I've been afraid since the 4th of May. I've been sitting in that barn every morning for 6 weeks afraid, and I never said because I figured a man's not supposed to. Elias. So we'll be afraid, he said. That's fine, I'm good at it. Ma'am, I've had 9 years practice. I'm about the best in this territory, but I'm going to get Harlan. Harlan Pike came out on the 22nd of June and was in that room 11 minutes. He came out into the kitchen and sat down at the table and did not say anything at all. And Elias Carter stood on his crutch and thought his heart was going to come out of his chest. Harlan. Sit down, Elias. Harlan. January, Harlan Pike said. Elias Carter did not sit down. He did not move at all. Harlan told his wife later that it was the single worst thing he ever watched a man do. Elias Carter stood in that kitchen for about 4 seconds, and then he turned around and went out the door, and Harlan found him. 20 minutes later, behind the barn, on his knees in the dirt, with a crutch thrown 11 feet away, and Harlan Pike did not say a word. He just stood there. For half an hour. 61 years old in the sun keeping a man company. When Elias could talk, he said, "9 years ago, you took your hat off in that door. I remember. You looked at me and you took your hat off and you didn't say nothing and I knew." Elias. "And you just said January." Elias Carter said, and I heard it the same way. I heard the same sentence, Harlan. Same voice, same kitchen, same man. And it was a good thing you were telling me, and I heard the other one. And I have got to live in this house for 7 months hearing the other one. Harlan Pike sat down on the ground next to him, which at 61 was a considerable operation. "Then hear this instead," he said. "Sarah was 24, and she was built narrow, and I was 19 miles away, and it took you 9 hours to get me, and there was nothing in my bag in 1875 that would have helped either one of them. And I have known that for a decade and told you so, and you have never once believed me. Your wife is 32. She's built like a barn door. She's the healthiest woman in this valley, and she can cross-foot a column of figures faster than my clerk. That's got nothing to do with—" "It's got everything to do with it," Harlan said. "Elias, I've caught 200 babies. I can tell you what kills women in this territory, and it ain't narrow hips, it's nobody being there. It's a man riding 19 miles in the dark, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and you're not going to argue with me, because I've earned it." He stood up slow. "I'm coming out on Christmas," Harlan Pike said, "and I'm not leaving till it's done." Elias Carter looked up at him. "That's 5 weeks." "It's 6, Harlan said. "I've got no wife and no children and a bad roof and a boy in Cheyenne who wants my practice and can have it, and I have spent 9 years wishing to God I'd been in that house on a Tuesday in 1875. His voice went. "So you can shut up, Elias, and let an old man sit in your kitchen for 6 weeks and eat your food because I'm coming, and there is not one thing on God's earth you can say about it." Amelia found out in July. She found out because Harlan Pike let it slip, and then went red as a stove, and she put down the pen and said, 6 weeks. "Ma'am, you're going to sit in my kitchen for 6 weeks. It's Mrs. Carter. It's a precaution." Harlan Pike. Amelia said, "You're going to close your practice." "I'm not." "There are 200 people in this valley, and you are the only doctor in 40 miles, and you're going to sit in my house from Christmas until it's over." Harlan Pike stood there with his hat in his hands. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And Amelia Carter, who had faced down Marcus Marsh in a bank and a church, who had dragged a 200-pound man across a floor by his collar, sat down at her own table and put her hand over her mouth. "Why?" she said. "You know why. I want to hear you say it. Mrs. Carter." "Say it, Harlan." "Because I did nothing for 11 weeks, Harlan Pike said. "Because I sat in that chair in October and believed every word you said and went home and ate my supper, and I have been trying since December to figure out what a man pays for that, and it turns out he don't. There's no bill, nobody sends one. You just have to go on living in the same body." He put his hat on. "So I'm coming out on Christmas. Let me come out on Christmas." Amelia Hart. Carter looked at that old man for a long moment. "Bring your own tobacco," she said. "Elias won't have it in the house, and I'm not fighting him about it in January." The winter of '85 was nothing. That's the thing about winters. The one that nearly killed Elias Carter was followed by one you could have farmed in. He limped through it, complaining about weather exactly as promised, and became insufferable about it exactly as promised, and every soul in that valley had to hear about his foot. Dutch Corliss brought a cradle in November. He brought it in the wagon bed under a tarp and would not come in the house, and stood in the yard with his hat in his hands, and Amelia came out with her hands full of flour and stopped dead. "Mr. Corliss." "It ain't new," Dutch said. "I want that said. It ain't new." "Dutch." "It was ours," he said. Amelia Carter put her hand on the wagon board. "Nora made me build it in '73. Dutch Corliss said, looking somewhere past her left ear. "Took me all winter. She'd come out and tell me it was wrong and I'd do it again. Did the rockers 4 times. He cleared his throat. It didn't work. He did it again. It never got used, ma'am. 12 years. Never got used one single day. Mr. Corliss, I can't. She's dying, Dutch said. Amelia went still. Harlan says spring, Dutch Corliss said. Maybe not. She's known since August, and she never said, and I found out because I read a letter I wasn't supposed to, and I have been sitting in that house for 3 months eating supper across from her, and neither one of us has said one word about it, because I ain't got the words, and she's protecting me, and I am letting her. His face came apart. You said it, he said. Last December on the street. You said it's an epidemic in this valley. Dutch. Ma'am? I said a thing about you in a store to 11 men, Dutch Corliss said. And I never met you. And you come to my house every Thursday for 2 years, and you hold my wife's hand, and you don't say nothing about it, not once, not one time, have you ever thrown that in my face, and I have been waiting 2 years for you to, and you never did, and I can't stand it no more. I'm not going to, Amelia said. Then let me give you the cradle, Dutch said. Let me give you the damn cradle, Mrs. Carter, because it's 12 years old, and it's the only thing I ever made in my life, and it's sitting in a room she can't get to anymore, and I would like it to hold something. Amelia Hart. Carter stood in that yard with flour on her hands. Bring it in, she said. I can't come in. Dutch Corliss, bring it in the house. And he did. He carried it into that kitchen and set it down by the stove and stood back and looked at it, and Amelia said, The rockers are perfect. 4th time, Dutch said. Go home to your wife, Amelia said, and Dutch say the words. I ain't got. You just said 11 of them in my yard, Amelia said. You've got them. You've had them the whole time. Go home and say them to her, and don't you dare say them. Well, don't you make it good, Dutch. She doesn't want a speech. She's been married to you for 13 years, and she knows exactly who she married. Just go say them badly. Dutch Corliss stood in that kitchen. I'll tell her about the cradle, he said. Tell her I'll be there Thursday. Nora Corliss lived until the following August, which was 5 months longer than Harlan gave her, and Amelia Carter was in that room when she went and held her hand, and afterward she told Elias one thing about it, and only one ever in 50 years. He talked to her, she said. The whole last month. He never shut up Elias. Dutch Corliss sat in that room and talked at that woman about nothing about a heifer, about a fence, about the weather for 4 weeks straight, and she'd smile with her eyes closed. And on the last day she was too far gone to hear anything, and he was still going, still talking, about a fence. Elias Carter didn't say anything. You'd have liked it, Amelia said. It was terrible. It was the worst talking I ever heard in my life. Ellen Marsh came out in December, 6 days before Christmas, and it had been a year and 5 days since the church. Amelia opened the door and did not know what to say, and Ellen Marsh, 20 now, and a different animal entirely, said, I've left. Left what? His house, Ellen said. My father's house. I've taken a room at Mrs. Lyle's, and I'm teaching the little ones at the school 3 days a week for $4, and my mother won't speak to me, and I have been standing on your porch for 11 minutes, trying to decide whether to knock, and I want you to know I nearly didn't. Amelia stepped back from the door. Sit down, she said. You're taller. I'm not taller. You're standing up, Amelia said. It reads the same. And Ellen Marsh sat down at that table and started to cry so hard she had to put her head on her arms. And Amelia Carter let her and did not say one word, and put a cup down where the girl could find it when she was done. He asked about you, Ellen said finally. Your father. He asks every week. She wiped her face with her sleeve like a boy. Every single week for a year. He doesn't say your name. He says, is there any news from the East Road? That's it. That's how he asks. And when I said you were expecting Miss Hart. Amelia. He put his pen down, Ellen said. That's all. He put his pen down and he sat there about 4 seconds, and then he picked it up again and asked me about the school. And Amelia, I have lived in that house 19 years, and I have never once seen that man put a pen down. Amelia Carter sat back in her chair. How is he? She said. Don't do that. I'm asking. Don't do that, Ellen said. Don't you be gracious about him, he tried to buy you. Ellen. Amelia leaned forward. How is he? Ellen Marsh's mouth trembled. He's alone, she said. In a house with 11 rooms. And my mother lives in it, and they don't talk, and he's 56, and he goes to that bank at 7 and comes home at 7, and he is the richest man in this valley, and there is not one single person in it who would sit down at his table on a Tuesday for any reason but money. She looked up. And he knows. That's what nobody understands about him. He's not a fool. He built it on purpose brick by brick for 30 years, and now he's in it. Ellen. And I left, she said, and it came apart in her throat. I left him in it. And I did the right thing, and I know I did the right thing, and I have never in my life felt more like a murderer. Amelia Hart. Carter reached across her own table and took that girl's hand in both of hers, the way she had at a wagon wheel, and in a doorway, and in a church. Ellen, she said, ask him for supper. He won't come. Ask him anyway. He won't come. Amelia, you don't understand what he... I understand better than you do, Amelia said, because I only met him 3 times, and you can't see him at all anymore, honey. You're too close and you've been hurt. Ask him. Every week, say, Papa, come to supper, and when he says no, ask him again the next week. For how long? Until one of you dies, Amelia said. Ellen Marsh stared at her. That's a terrible answer. Yes, Amelia said. But it's the only one that's ever worked on anybody, and Ellen, it's what your father did to me. He asked me 3 times. He asked me in a bank, and he asked me on a Friday, and he asked me in a church with a doctor on his wrist. That man never stops asking. It's the only warm thing in him, and he uses it like a hammer. So use it back. Marcus Marsh did not come to supper. Not that week, not that month. Ellen asked him 31 times in 1886, and he said no 31 times, and she told Amelia every one, and Amelia said the same thing every time, ask him again. Harlan Pike came out on the 23rd of December and did not leave. He slept in the front room. He ate their food. He smoked on the porch in 12-degree weather because Elias wouldn't have it in the house and complained about it constantly. And on the 3rd of January, Amelia found the 2 of them at the table at 4 in the morning playing checkers with the board upside down because neither of them could think. What are you doing? Nothing, Elias said. You're playing checkers wrong. We're playing checkers fine, Harlan said. Harlan Pike, the board is... Go back to bed, ma'am, Harlan said. And Amelia Carter looked at those 2 men, a widower of 10 years and a doctor who'd never married, sitting in a kitchen at 4 in the morning, pretending to play a game because they were both too frightened to sleep, and went back to bed and lay there with her hand on her own belly, and thought, I have been in this territory 16 months, and I have somehow acquired the 2 most useless men on God's earth, and cried and did not know why, and would tell you 50 years later that it was the happiest she had ever been in her life up to that hour. Chapter 9. It started on the 9th of January. It went 2 days. Elias Carter was put out of that room at 11 o'clock on the first morning, and he did not go further than the other side of the door, and for 31 hours, the entire distance between Elias Carter and his wife was 1 inch of pine board. At hour 19, he said through it, Amelia, don't talk to me. Amelia, Elias Carter, if you say 1 word to me, I will come through this door and kill you. 2 chairs, Elias said. The room went quiet. Harlan Pike, who was 62 years old and had caught 200 babies and had never once in his life heard anything like it, put his head down and worked and pretended to be deaf. Say it again, Amelia said. There's 2 chairs in this house. There's 4. There's 4, Elias said. There's 4, and I made 'em in March like a sleepwalker, and I never said the word out loud because I was scared, and I'm saying it now. Amelia, I'm saying it through a door like a coward, and I'm sorry. I've had 39 years to get better at this, and I never did. I want it. I want the chairs full. I've wanted it since March. I want it so bad I can't breathe, and I have been pretending for 10 months that I'd be fine either way. And it was a lie. It was the only lie I ever told you, and I'd rather you knew. Silence. Elias, Amelia said. Yes, ma'am. That was a whole speech. Yes, ma'am. You made a speech. Well, Elias Carter said, I've had 19 hours. And Amelia Carter laughed in the worst hour of the worst thing her body had ever done at 3 in the morning on the 10th of January. And Harlan Pike said, Ma'am, don't laugh. And she said, Shut up, Harlan, and laughed anyway. The girl came at 5 in the morning on the 11th. Harlan Pike opened that door, and Elias Carter was standing on the other side of it exactly where he had been for 31 hours on one crutch gray as ash. And Harlan Pike took his hat off. Elias Carter's legs went out from under him. He hit that floor, and Harlan Pike said, Elias, God Almighty, no, son, no, I forgot, I've had my hat on for 2 days. And Elias Carter sat on the floor of his own house and could not hear a word of it. They're fine, Harlan was shouting. They're fine. Elias, look at me. She's fine. The baby's fine. She's angry as hell, and she's already told me to get out, Elias. They're fine. Say it again, Elias said. They're fine. Say it again. They're fine, Harlan Pike said, and got down on the floor with him, and the two of them sat against the wall of that hallway, a rancher and a doctor, and neither one of them could talk at all. And from the other room, Amelia Carter's voice said ruined and furious and absolutely unmistakable. Harlan Pike, what did you do? They named her Ruth. Elias said it first. That's the part Amelia could never tell without stopping. She'd had it in her mouth for 2 days and couldn't say it because it was too much, because you don't put a dead child's name on a living one, because it's the kind of thing that could bend a life, and Elias Carter took that baby in 2 hands that had never held anything smaller than a calf, and looked at her for about a minute and said, Well, hello, Ruth. Amelia Hart. Carter put her hands over her face. Elias, that's her name, ain't it? You can't just... Amelia. He didn't look up from the baby. I've been carrying that name around this house for 16 months. You said it out loud one time in September of '84, in a street to a man who was ruining you. You never said it again, not once. 16 months and you never said it again, and I have listened for it every day. Elias, stop. So I'm saying it, Elias Carter said. I'm going to say it about 9,000 times. I'm going to holler it out that door at supper time for 20 years, till the whole valley's sick of it, and Amelia, that little girl in Baltimore, is going to have her name shouted across a yard in Wyoming every night of my life, and that's all I've got. That's the whole thing. That's what I've got instead of words. Amelia Carter looked at her husband holding her daughter. It's better than Shakespeare, she said. Hiya. Marcus Marsh came in February. He came alone in a rig at 4 in the afternoon, and he sat in it in the yard for 6 minutes without getting down, and Amelia watched him through the window with a baby on her shoulder and said, Elias. I see him. Elias, don't. I ain't going to do nothing, Elias Carter said. Ma'am, I ain't said a word to that man in 14 months, and I'm not going to start now. That's your business. It always was. She went out. Marcus Marsh got down from the rig, and he was 56, and he looked 70. And Amelia Hart Carter stood in her own yard in February with her daughter against her collarbone and looked at the man who had offered her $2,000 to stop existing. Miss Hart. Mrs. Carter. Yes, he said. I know. I've been saying it wrong on purpose for a year, and I'd rather you didn't ask me why. All right. He stood there. My daughter asks me to supper every week, Marcus Marsh said. I know. She's asked me 43 times. I know that too. She told me it was your idea. It was, Amelia said. Marcus Marsh nodded slowly like a man confirming a figure. Why? He said. Because you're a person. You said that to me in a church. You didn't believe me in a church, Amelia said. And Marcus Marsh stood in that yard and said, No, I didn't. He looked at the baby. He looked at her for a long time. A long, long time. Longer than was comfortable. Longer than was decent. And Amelia Carter did not move. and did not shield her, and did not say one word, and let him look. "That's the girl," he said. "That's Ruth." Marcus Marsh's face did something. "You named her?" "Yes." Mrs. Carter." His voice had gone somewhere strange. "That's the name in the letter." "Yes, that's the name he read out loud in my parlor," Marcus Marsh said, "in September of '84, in a little voice. And my wife laughed, and my daughter laughed, and I was standing by the window with a glass in my hand, and I did not laugh, and I have never told a living soul that, and I want to be very clear that I did nothing at all, which is worse, and I've known it was worse for a year and a half." Amelia Hart Carter said nothing. "I've come to say a thing," Marsh said. "I've been in that rig 6 minutes trying to arrange it, and I can't, and I'm 56, and I've arranged everything I've ever said since I was 20, so you'll have to take it badly arranged." "Say it badly," Amelia said. "I'd like to lend your husband money," Marcus Marsh said. Amelia Carter stared at him. "That is the worst thing I have ever heard a man say in a yard," she said. "I know," Marsh said, and something in his face broke open, and Amelia watched a banker at 56 years old flounder like a boy. I know what it sounds like. But it's the only language I have got. Mrs. Carter, it is the only one I ever learned, and I have sat in an office for 14 months trying to think of what a man does, and it always comes out as terms. 4%. 10 years. On the improvements. Only. Not the section. He wants to put a well on the East End. Everybody in this valley knows. He wants to put a well on the East End. He's been telling Harlan Pike about it for 6 years, and Harlan Pike tells everybody. Mr. Marsh. "And I can't say the other thing," Marcus Marsh said. "I can't. I've tried. I sat down 4 times to write it, and I can't make my hand do it, so I wrote a note at 4% instead, and I'm standing in your yard holding it like an idiot, and you're going to say no." Amelia Hart. Carter looked at that man. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "what's the recording fee?" Marcus Marsh went absolutely still. $1.80, he said. "And who pays it?" "I do," Marcus Marsh said. "Then come inside," Amelia said. "It's 12 degrees, and you're holding your hat like it's on fire, and my husband won't speak to you, and you'll have to eat anyway. Harlan's in there. He'll be unbearable. He'll be the most unbearable man in the territory about it, and you'll have to sit there and take it, because you called his note on nobody for 11 weeks, and he's never forgiven you for it." Mrs. Carter. Marcus. Amelia Hart. Carter said come to supper. And Marcus Marsh, 56 years old, the richest man in Red Valley, who had never once in 19 years been surprised, stood in a yard on the East Road and could not move. "Say it again," he said. "Come to supper," Amelia said. "Nobody has ever," Marcus Marsh said and stopped, and started again. "In 30 years. Nobody has ever asked me to supper for any reason but money, not one time." "I know," Amelia said. "Ellen told me. Now come inside before your hands come off."
Dạ po.
He came inside. He sat at that table for 2 hours, and Elias Carter did not say one word to him, not one, and passed him the potatoes twice. And Amelia, watching, understood that in the entire vocabulary of Elias Carter, passing a man the potatoes twice was a speech that went on for pages. Harlan Pike was, as promised, unbearable. Marcus Marsh took it, and at the end of it, at the door, with his hat on and his coat on, and the note at 4% still in his inside pocket, where it stayed for 2 more months before Elias finally signed it, Marcus Marsh turned around and said, "Mrs. Carter, in November of '84, you told me everyone has a number. You told me that. And you said you didn't have one. I remember." "You were lying," Marcus Marsh said. Amelia Carter's eyebrows went up. "You had a number," Marsh said. "I've been 14 months working it out, and I've got it now, and it's the only sum I've ever done that I couldn't do in the room." He put his hat on. "Your number was 2 chairs, ma'am. That's all. That's what I was bidding against with $2,000 and a coach to Denver, and I never had a prayer. And the worst hour of my professional life was the hour I figured out that if I'd offered you 10,000, you'd have laughed at me, because the thing you wanted didn't have a price on it. It had a man on it, and I have never in 30 years learned how to bid against that." He opened the door. "That's why I lost," Marcus Marsh said. "Not the church, not the letter, not my daughter. I lost in November in my own bank in the first 4 minutes, and I didn't know it for a year." And then he went out. He came to supper every Sunday for 11 years. That's the thing nobody in Red Valley ever believed, and it's true. And there are people alive today who'd swear it isn't. Marcus Marsh in a rig on the East Road every Sunday from February of 1886 until the day he died in 1897, and he was buried in that valley with 4 people at the grave, and one of them was Amelia Carter. He never apologized, not once, not in 11 years. He just came. Amelia told Ellen once years later when Ellen was 30 and had 2 boys and a horse trader from Laramie who made her laugh. "Your father apologized to me every single Sunday for 11 years. He never said one word about it." Ellen. Amelia said, "He drove 11 miles. There were 3 more. Ruth in 86. Sarah in 88, and Amelia named that one. And Elias Carter went out to the barn for an hour and came back with his face washed and never said a word about it. And that was another speech that went on for pages. A boy, Thomas, in 91, who was born in 9 minutes and nearly on the floor, and grew up to be the biggest man in the county. And Cora, in 94, named for a woman who had blocked a doorway with her body in 1884, and sent $40 to Ohio, and got a letter back in the spring of 85, and went to Ohio in 86 and came home with a photograph she carried in her purse until she died. 4 chairs was not enough. Elias made 2 more in 91 and swore at them the whole time. Petey Kessler worked that ranch for 19 years and married a girl from Laramie and named his first boy Elias, and nobody ever mentioned that the man had once been a 14-year-old who couldn't hold a secret in a bucket. And the fact that he couldn't is the entire reason the town turned. And if there is a moral in any of this, that's probably it, and nobody's ever liked it much. Mrs. Lyle died in 1892. She left the boarding house to Ellen Marsh, and a note that said for the room in December and nothing else, and Ellen never explained it to anybody. Mr. Fong ran that laundry until 1901. On the day he closed it, he came out the East Road in a wagon, and Amelia Carter made him sit at her table and would not let him leave for 4 hours. And afterward, Elias said, "What did you 2 talk about?" And Amelia said, 1884. And Elias said, "For 4 hours." And Amelia said, "Elias, it's still going on. It's going on for somebody right now 11 miles that way. It never stopped. We just got out." Dutch Corliss lived to be 81. He married again in 1889, a widow from Cheyenne, and he talked her half to death for 29 years. And at his funeral in 1918, his second wife told the whole church that the man had never once shut up, not for a single day, and that she had never met anybody so afraid of a quiet room. And she said it laughing and crying at the same time, and Amelia Carter, 71 that year, in the 3rd pew, was the only person in that building who knew why. Harlan Pike never left. He tried. He gave the practice to the boy from Cheyenne in 1887 and moved into the front room for a month. And he died in that room in 1899 at 75 with 3 of the Carter children on the bed, and Elias Carter holding his hand, and the last thing he ever said perfectly clear was, "Ma'am, the board's upside down." Josiah Bell wrote a letter in 1903. It came from Sacramento. 19 years. Amelia Carter was 56 years old, and she stood in that kitchen and looked at the handwriting on the front, and her hands did not shake, and she noted with some interest that they didn't. She opened it. It was 4 pages. It was an explanation. It was a very long, very careful, very well-arranged explanation of a man's circumstances in the autumn of 1884. The pressures, the misunderstandings, the way a thing gets away from a fellow, and it did not contain the word sorry anywhere, and it did not contain the name Ruth, and on the 3rd page he had spelled believe correctly. Amelia Carter read it twice. Then she went to the stove. "Amelia," Elias said. What is it?" And Amelia Hart Carter, 56 years old with 4 children and a well on the East End, and 6 chairs, looked at her husband and said, "Nothing," and put it in the fire. She said later, it was the single most satisfying act of her entire life, and that she was ashamed of how satisfying it was for about 4 days and then wasn't. Tug. Elias Carter died on the 2nd of March 1911 at 65 of a heart that quit while he was standing in his own barn, and Thomas found him, and Thomas was 20, and it broke something in him that took 11 years to set. He had been complaining about the foot that morning. Amelia Carter buried him on a Tuesday and did not cry at the funeral, and there were 200 people at it, and the whole valley talked about how she didn't cry, and some of them, even then, even in 1911, said something about the Eastern woman. That's how towns work. She went home. She sat down at that table, and Amelia Hart Carter, 64 years old, sat in a kitchen with 6 chairs in it and looked at the one across from her and put her head down and cried for 11 hours until her daughter Ruth came in at 4 in the morning and found her and Ruth Carter, 25, and named for a girl who died in Baltimore, sat down in her father's chair and held her mother's hand and did not say one word. "Don't say anything," Amelia said. "I'm not." "Don't you say one word, Ruth Ann." "I'm not saying anything, Mama," Ruth said. And Amelia Carter lifted her head and looked at her daughter sitting in that chair and started to laugh horribly wetly and said, "God Almighty, you're him." She lived another 7 years. She ran that ranch. Of course she did. She ran it with Thomas, and she ran it well, and she doubled it, and in 1916, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, which had met every January since 1873, and had never in its life had a woman in the room, invited Amelia H. Carter to Cheyenne to speak on the subject of weight tickets. She was 69. She went. She spoke for 40 minutes without a note. She told them about a shoebox. She died in the spring of 1918 at 71 in that house in that room, and Ruth was there, and Sarah was there, and Thomas was there, and Cora came from Denver on the train and made it by 6 hours. And on the last afternoon, Amelia Hart Carter told her granddaughter, a girl of 9, sitting on the floor by the bed, who lived to be 94, and told this story to a room full of people in 1996, and is the only reason any of it is known at all. She told that girl about the prayer. "I never told anybody," she said. "Not your grandfather, not Harlan, nobody in 34 years. "What did you say, Grandma?" "I said, don't do it twice," Amelia Carter said. "That's all. 4 words. On the floor of that kitchen with the storm going. And I hadn't spoken to God since a woman blocked a door on me in September, and I got down on that floor and said 4 words. The girl said, "Did he answer?" And Amelia Hart Carter, who had been thrown out of a boarding house, a church, a laundry, and a school in the space of 9 weeks in 1884, who had been offered $2,000 to stop existing and said no, who had crawled 200 yards on her hands and knees in a blizzard following wagon ruts with her face 6 inches off the ground, who had saved a man's foot with 1 sentence from a dead grandmother, who had walked into the only building in Red Valley that had ever been shut in her face and made an entire town go quiet. Amelia Hart. Carter looked at the ceiling of the house she had walked into as a dying stranger 34 years before and smiled. "Honey," she said, "I've been sitting at a table with 2 chairs in it for 34 years. She died that night at about 9 o'clock with her hand in her daughter's, and they buried her on the east section next to her husband on a ridge above a well. He'd wanted for 6 years and never got around to bragging about. And the stone says exactly 7 words because Ruth Carter picked them, and because her mother had told her once that Elias Carter never in his life used 1 word more than he had to, and never once used 1 less than he meant Amelia Hart Carter. Somebody came out of a field. Nobody wanted her. 1 man did, and he had no words for it, so he built her a chair in the dark on the 3rd night and never took the bar off her door. And that was enough, and it was always going to be enough, because that is what love is when you strip every pretty thing off of it, somebody who stays at the table. The town that threw Amelia Hart in the mud is gone. Red Valley isn't on a map anymore. The ranch she built is still there.